Bosco trusted his own father with his home, his children, and the woman he loved, while he was thousands of miles away chasing a better future. The unthinkable happened. Neither of them knew they were already walking into a curse buried deep within their bloodline. A secret so dangerous it would one day turn love into shame, families into enemies, and their unborn children into victims of a truth that should never have been discovered. The sun always rose slowly over Lukome Village. Every morning, golden light spread across the tall elephant grass, the cassava gardens, and the muddy footpaths that twisted between huts like snakes after rain. Roosters crowed from every corner. Goats cried impatiently. Women swept compounds with long grass brooms while smoke rose gently from cooking stones. Lukome was not a rich village, but it was alive. It sat quietly in the deep green plains of northern Uganda, hidden between wide millet gardens and clusters of mango trees in Gulu district. During the rainy season, the village smelled of wet soil and fresh beans. During the dry season, dust danced in the air like brown smoke whenever children ran across the roads. Everybody knew everybody in Lukome. If someone cooked meat, neighbors smelled it before sunset. If a child misbehaved in one home, another parent disciplined him before his own mother heard the news. Secrets rarely survived longer than 2 market days. Among the respected families of the village were the Okellos and the Lamaros. The Okello family lived near the old mango tree beside River Unyama. Their home had 3 grass-thatched huts arranged in a half-circle around a clean compound. Chickens wandered freely there, and cattle bells echoed from nearby grazing fields every evening. The head of the family was Otima Okello, a tall, dark-skinned man with a deep voice that frightened stubborn children. He was famous for his cattle and for settling village disputes fairly. Even elders listened carefully whenever he spoke during clan meetings. His wife, Mama Aba, was the kind of woman who fed visitors before asking their names. She carried herself with calm wisdom and always tied her gomizi neatly, even while digging in the gardens. Together they had 4 children: Brian Okello, the firstborn son, energetic and fearless; Ace and Grace, the clever and talkative; Lake Stella, quiet like early morning dew; Junior Okello, the stubborn lastborn who never stopped asking questions. Across the small stream that separated the eastern and western sides of Lukome lived the Lamaro family. Bosco Lamaro, the father, had once been a primary school teacher before retirement weakened his knees. Villagers respected him because he spoke fluent English and owned the only Bible in the area with a leather cover. His wife, Mama Okello, sold sim-sim paste, silverfish, and dried fish at the trading center every Thursday market day. She laughed loudly and never lost an argument. Together they had 3 children: Sharon Lamaro the beautiful, confident, and sharp-minded. Doreen Lamaro was the soft-spoken and humble; Okan Peter, the troublesome younger brother, known for stealing mangoes from neighbors. From the time they could walk, Brian Okello and Sharon Lamaro became inseparable. People in the village used to joke that the 2 children shared one shadow. At dawn, they fetched water together from the River Unyama, carrying yellow jerrycans almost bigger than their small bodies. On the way back, Brian usually carried Sharon's jerrycan whenever she complained. Brian," Sharon would shout dramatically. "You want me to become short forever carrying heavy things?" Brian would laugh. "You are already short." "I am not short. You are small, like a chicken." Then Sharon would chase him with a stick while both of them laughed loudly enough to scare birds from nearby trees. During rainy seasons, the 2 hunted grasshoppers at night using smoking tins and old saucepans. Brian always acted brave until grasshoppers started flying directly at his face. Remove it," he would scream while Sharon rolled on the ground laughing. "You fear grasshoppers more than girls," she teased him. One evening, After a heavy rainstorm, Brian slipped in mud while trying to impress Sharon by jumping across a flooded trench. Instead of landing properly, he fell directly into pig waste behind old Mama Alice's hut. The smell followed him the entire day. Village children sang songs about him for weeks. Brian the pig swimmer, Brian the pig swimmer. Even the elders laughed whenever he passed. But Sharon defended him fiercely. At least he is brave, she told the others. You people fear even frogs. The truth was simple. Sharon admired Brian long before she understood what love meant, and Brian protected Sharon as naturally as breathing. Whenever boys at school teased her, Brian fought them immediately. One afternoon at Lukome Primary School, a boy called Ojara pulled Sharon's hair during break time. Before teachers arrived, Brian had already tackled him into the dust. Never touch her again. Brian shouted angrily. Ojara spat dirt from his mouth. Who is she to you? Brian paused. The other children waited. Then he answered proudly, she is under my protection. For days, the entire school talked about it. Even the teachers laughed quietly. Every morning, Brian and Sharon walked barefoot to school together, carrying worn-out bags stitched repeatedly by their mothers. The journey was long, nearly 5 kilometers under hot sun, but the two never seemed tired when together. Sometimes they competed over who answered questions faster in class. Sometimes they fought over roasted cassava. Sometimes they stopped near anthills and argued about imaginary things for no reason at all. But by evening, they always walked home side by side again. Life in Lukome moved slowly but beautifully. At sunset, drums echoed across the village during traditional dances. Elders gathered beneath mango trees, drinking ijon from long straws while discussing politics, marriage, and stubborn children. Children played dodging stones until darkness swallowed the roads. Women sang while preparing boo and millet bread. And somewhere in the middle of all that village life, Brian and Sharon continued growing closer, year after year. When they reached their teenage years, changes slowly began appearing. Brian became taller and stronger from digging gardens and herding cattle. They both joined Lukome Secondary School. Girls at school started whispering whenever he passed. Sharon also changed. Her beauty became impossible to ignore. She carried herself with confidence that made even grown men turn their heads twice at the market. For the first time, Brian started feeling nervous around her. One afternoon, Sharon caught him staring at her while she washed clothes near the stream. What? She asked suspiciously. Nothing. You are lying. I said nothing. You were looking at me like a hungry goat looking at cassava leaves. Brian immediately looked away while Sharon burst into laughter. You have become shy suddenly, she teased. I am not shy. You are. I am not. Sharon laughed even harder. That laugh stayed in Brian's mind the entire night. As years passed, the villagers continued watching the two with amusement. These children, old men often said while drinking ajon beneath the jackfruit tree, they are already husband and wife without knowing. Women fetching water nodded in agreement. Even spirits can see it. Nobody imagined those harmless village jokes would someday grow into something far deeper and far more dangerous. Because fate was already quietly preparing a road for Brian Okello and Sharon Lamaro, a road filled with love, sacrifice, betrayal, tears, and secrets capable of destroying entire families. But in those early days, none of that mattered. At that time, they were only two innocent village children running barefoot through the green fields of Lukome, believing life would always remain simple forever. The years moved quickly in Lukome Village. Before anyone realized it, the small children who once chased grasshoppers near the River Unyama had become teenagers. Their voices changed, their bodies grew taller, responsibilities increased. Even the games they played slowly disappeared like footprints after rain. But one thing never changed. Brian Okello and Sharon Lamaro were still always together. Every morning before sunrise, Mama Abba woke up the Okello household with a loud knock on the hut doors. Wake up, lazy people never eat well. Brian hated mornings. He would roll inside his blanket pretending not to hear until Junior jumped on him shouting, "Brother, Sharon is already outside." Immediately, Brian woke up. Junior laughed loudly. "You only wake fast because of Sharon. Shut up and go wash your face," Brian grumbled while throwing a sandal at him. Outside, Sharon stood beside the compound carrying books against her chest. By then she studied at Lukome Secondary School together with Brian. The two now wore blue uniforms, though most times their shoes were torn and dusty before midday. Sharon smiled when Brian finally came out. "You walk slower than old Bosco nowadays." "At least I woke up," Brian replied lazily. "You even forgot to comb your hair." Brian touched his head quickly. Sharon burst into laughter. "You believed me." Brian chased her around the compound while Asen and Junior clapped happily like spectators watching wrestling. The road to school had changed little over the years. The same narrow dusty paths cut through cassava gardens and grazing land. The same birds sang from mango trees every morning. Women still walked balancing firewood on their heads while children ran half-dressed through compounds. But now Brian and Sharon talked differently. Their conversations were no longer only about grasshoppers and football. Sometimes they spoke about dreams. "I want to become a journalist," Sharon said one morning proudly. "I want people on the radio to know my voice everywhere." Brian laughed. "With your noise, even Kampala will hear you." "I am serious." "I know. And you?" Brian looked ahead quietly for a moment. "I want to leave the village one day." "Leave?" "Yes." "Why?" Brian kicked a stone from the road. "I don't want to spend my whole life digging and selling cows. I want something bigger." Sharon studied him silently. Whenever Brian spoke like that, his eyes changed. They carried a hunger bigger than Lukome itself. That frightened her sometimes. At school, they became famous. Teachers trusted Sharon because she was clever and fearless during debates. She spoke English confidently, even when others feared embarrassment. Brian, meanwhile, became known for football. Every Friday evening, boys gathered on the dusty school field for matches against nearby villages. Brian played barefoot most times, but nobody could outrun him once he touched the ball. Girls screamed his name during games. "Brian!" Some climbed anthills just to watch him play. Sharon pretended not to care, but inside, jealousy burned quietly whenever girls surrounded him after matches. One afternoon, after Brian scored the winning goal against Awach Secondary School, a girl called Nancy gave him roasted groundnuts. Sharon watched from a distance with narrowed eyes. As they walked home later, she remained unusually silent. "What happened to you?" Brian finally asked. "Nothing." "You're angry." I said nothing. Brian smiled slightly. "You're annoyed because Nancy gave me groundnuts." Sharon stopped walking immediately. "Who said that? So is it true?" "It is not true." "Then why are you walking like someone stole your chicken?" Sharon folded her arms angrily. "Maybe you should walk home with Nancy and her groundnuts." Brian laughed so hard he nearly fell into a ditch. For the first time, Sharon realized something uncomfortable. She did not like sharing Brian's attention, not even a little. Meanwhile, village life continued with its usual dramas. Old Mama Alice still fought with neighbors over wandering goats. Okan Peter still stole mangoes and denied everything even when juice remained on his mouth. One day, Bosco Lamaro caught Okan secretly eating smoked meat meant for visitors. "Okan," the boy froze. Bosco pointed at him with disappointment. "You are eating like a hyena." Okan swallowed quickly. "I was testing if it had poison." Even Bosco nearly laughed. In the evenings, young people gathered near trading centers to listen to music from small battery radios. Sometimes generators played Nigerian films on tiny television screens while villagers squeezed together on wooden benches. Brian and Sharon loved those nights. Though most movies stopped halfway whenever power failed, they still enjoyed sitting together beneath the stars listening to distant laughter and music. One Saturday evening during a village dance celebration, something happened that many people later remembered clearly. Traditional drums echoed loudly across Lukome as dancers moved in circles around the fire. Women ululated proudly while young men competed to impress girls with energetic Lara Karaka dances. Brian joined the dancers confidently. Sweat covered his face as he jumped and stamped his feet rhythmically. The crowd cheered loudly. Then suddenly, one elderly woman shouted jokingly, "Hey Sharon, why are you hiding there? Your husband is dancing alone." The crowd exploded with laughter. Sharon immediately covered her face in embarrassment. Brian stopped dancing awkwardly. Even the elders clapped mischievously. Let her join him. No shame. They already belong together. Sharon tried walking away, but her friends pushed her toward the dance circle. Go, go. Finally, she entered shyly. The drums grew louder. For a few moments, Brian and Sharon danced facing each other beneath the firelight while villagers watched happily around them. And something strange happened. The teasing suddenly stopped feeling like a joke. Brian looked at Sharon differently that night. Not as the girl who chased grasshoppers with him. Not as his childhood best friend. But as a young woman. Beautiful. Alive. Dangerously close. Even Sharon felt it too. When their eyes met during the dance, her heartbeat became uneven. Neither of them spoke about it afterward. But from that night onward, silence sometimes entered their friendship unexpectedly. A silence filled with emotions neither fully understood yet. Then came the beginning of Senior 4. Pressure increased heavily. Teachers constantly warned students about national examinations. "Your future starts now," Mr. Odong repeated daily. Some students dropped out due to school fees. Others disappeared into early marriages. One girl in Sharon's class became pregnant and never returned. That reality frightened both Brian and Sharon. One evening, while reading beneath a paraffin lamp at the Lamaro home, Sharon suddenly asked quietly, "Brian, do you think we shall really leave this village one day?" Brian looked at her seriously. "Yes. How are you sure?" "Because I cannot accept the ending here. And if life refuses..." Brian leaned closer. "Then we force life to listen." That confidence was one reason she loved him without admitting it. Outside, rain began falling heavily onto iron roofs. The paraffin lamp flickered gently between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then unexpectedly, thunder exploded loudly nearby. Sharon jumped in fear, instinctively grabbing Brian's arm. Both froze. Brian slowly looked down at her hand holding him. Sharon realized it too late. Their eyes met. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer, dangerous. Before either could speak, Mama Akello entered carrying cassava. "Ai, thunder is serious tonight." She stopped briefly after noticing their closeness. A small knowing smile crossed her face, but she said nothing. Parents usually notice love before children themselves understand it. That night, Sharon failed to sleep properly, and Brian spent hours staring at the roof inside his hut listening to rain. For the first time in his life, the future no longer looked simple, because somewhere between childhood games, school walks, football matches and village dances, friendship had quietly become something far deeper. After the rainy season ended, Lukome Village became dusty again. Dry winds swept through the roads every afternoon, lifting red soil into the air. The cassava leaves turned pale under the burning sun, and children spent evenings chasing each other near the trading center, while women roasted maize by the roadside. But for Brian Okello and Sharon Lamaro, life had started changing in ways neither fully understood. Ever since the night of the village dance and the storm at Sharon's home, things between them felt different. Not bad, just heavier. Sometimes when they walked together, silence appeared unexpectedly. Sometimes they caught each other staring and quickly looked away. Even the simplest touch suddenly carried strange electricity. And because they had grown up together, Both noticed the changes immediately. One Monday morning, Sharon arrived late at the Okello compound wearing a yellow sweater over her school uniform. Brian was washing his face outside using cold water from a basin. The moment he saw her, he forgot what he was doing and splashed water directly into his nose. Pwah! Sharon burst into laughter. You are bathing your lungs now. Brian coughed painfully while Junior rolled on the ground laughing. You see? Junior shouted. Brother behaves like a goat whenever Sharon comes. Brian grabbed a small stick. Junior, today I will kill you. The boy ran away screaming dramatically. Sharon continued laughing until tears formed in her eyes. Brian stared at her for a second too long. That smile, that laugh. He suddenly realized something dangerous. He was completely in love with her. The realization frightened him more than he expected. For years, Sharon had simply been Sharon, his best friend, his classmate, his partner in every childhood memory. But now whenever she came close, his heart reacted like drums during bola dances, and he had no idea what to do about it. Meanwhile, Sharon was fighting her own private war. At school, girls constantly talked about Brian, especially after football matches. Brian is becoming handsome these days, Nancy whispered one afternoon during lunch. Another girl nodded quickly, and tall, even teachers fear him. Sharon kept quiet while chewing cassava aggressively. Nancy noticed immediately. Are you angry? I am not. You like him. Sharon almost choked. What nonsense. All of Lukome already knows. Know what? That you and Brian are behaving like husband and wife without cows being paid. The girls exploded into laughter. Sharon stood up immediately. You people are mad. But as she walked away, her ears burned with embarrassment. Deep down, she knew the girls were right. That evening after prep lessons, students began leaving school in groups. The sun was setting beautifully across the fields, painting the sky orange and gold. Brian waited for Sharon beneath the old mango tree outside the school gate. You delayed, he complained. You have only waited 3 minutes. It felt like 3 years. Sharon laughed softly. Together they started the long walk home. Halfway through the journey, they reached the Unyama River. The water level was lower now because of the dry season, exposing smooth stones where children usually sat fishing. Brian suddenly stopped walking. Come. Where? Just come. Suspiciously, Sharon followed him down toward the riverbank. There, beneath a large tamarind tree, Brian sat quietly staring at the moving water. Sharon sat beside him. For once, even she had no jokes. The evening breeze moved gently through the grass around them. Finally, Brian spoke. Do you ever think about the future? Sharon smiled slightly. You ask that question every week. I am serious today, so answer first. Brian picked up a small stone and threw it into the river. I'm thinking about leaving Lukome. You already said that. Yes, but this time, I don't want to leave alone. Sharon looked at him carefully. The seriousness in his voice made her heartbeat quicken. Brian turned toward her slowly. Sharon. For the first time in years, Brian looked nervous. Actually, nervous. The fearless football player who fought boys twice his size suddenly struggled to speak. Sharon almost smiled at the sight. What is it? Brian rubbed his hands together awkwardly. I don't know how to say this properly. Since when do you fail to talk? Stop laughing. This is serious. Immediately, Sharon became quiet. Brian took a deep breath. You are my best friend. Sharon nodded softly. And when something good happens to me, you are the first person I want to tell. Another nod. And when something bad happens, I always look for you. The air between them became heavy. Brian continued quietly. When I imagine the future, you're always there somehow. Sharon's chest tightened. The river flowed gently behind them. Birds sang from distant trees, and suddenly the whole world felt very still. Brian looked directly into her eyes. I think I love you. Silence. Complete silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Sharon stared at him without breathing properly. She had imagined this moment many times secretly, but now that it was happening, words disappeared completely. Brian quickly looked away. "You don't have to answer now," he said nervously. "Forget I even said it." Then suddenly, Sharon laughed. Not mockingly, softly, beautifully. Brian looked confused. "You are laughing? You are stupid." "What? You took years to realize?" Brian blinked. Sharon shook her head, smiling. "Brian Okello, I have loved you since primary school." For 2 seconds, Brian simply stared at her like someone struck by lightning. Then both burst into laughter at the same time. Relief flooded through them so powerfully that neither could stop smiling. "You mean all this time?" "Yes. And you never said anything. You also never said anything. You could have helped me. You are the man." Brian laughed loudly. "You suffered silently for years. You also suffered." They laughed until tears formed in their eyes. And there beneath the tamarind tree beside River Unyama, childhood friendship quietly transformed into first love. Real love. Young, pure, dangerously beautiful. The sun had almost disappeared when silence returned again. This time, softer, warmer. Brian slowly reached for Sharon's hand. She allowed it. Their fingers locked naturally, like they had always belonged together. Then Brian spoke carefully. "So, what happens now?" Sharon smiled mischievously. "Now? Yes, you buy me roasted meat tomorrow." Brian stared at her. "That is all. I have suffered emotionally for many years. Compensation is needed." Brian laughed hard. "You love food too much, and you love me too much?" Both froze slightly after the words escaped her mouth. Sharon immediately covered her face. "Hey, forget I said that." But Brian's smile widened slowly. "No," he said softly. "Say it again." Sharon refused completely. She stood up and began walking away quickly. Brian chased after her laughing. By the time they reached the village, darkness had covered most compounds, but something had changed forever between them. And unfortunately, Lukome Village had very sharp eyes. The first person to notice was old Mama Alice. As Brian escorted Sharon home, the old woman watched from her compound while chewing sugar cane. She murmured knowingly. The next morning, half the village somehow already sensed something. Women fetching water smiled suspiciously when Sharon passed. Young boys teased Brian endlessly. "Brother Brian, when is the introduction ceremony? How many cows are you preparing?" Even Okan Peter became impossible. At breakfast, he stared at Sharon dramatically. "So it is official now?" Sharon nearly dropped her cup. "What official? You and Brian. Even goats know already." Mama Okello laughed loudly from the cooking area. Bosco adjusted his glasses carefully. Meanwhile, Sharon wanted the ground to swallow her alive. But secretly, she had never felt happier in her entire life. After Brian and Sharon finally confessed their feelings to each other beside River Unyama, life in Lukome Village became sweeter and far more complicated. At first, they tried behaving normally, but love has a way of exposing itself, especially in villages where even chickens seem to carry gossip. Suddenly, every small thing became suspicious. If Brian fetched extra water from the borehole, women whispered. If Sharon laughs too much near the road, Brian must be around. If the two sat together during church service, old women exchanged knowing smiles. Even children started singing songs whenever they passed. Bride and groom, bride and groom. One afternoon, Sharon became so embarrassed she chased village children with a slipper until one boy fell into a cassava garden. Still, despite the teasing, those became the happiest days of their lives. Every evening after school, Brian escorted Sharon home through longer routes on purpose just to spend extra time with her. Sometimes they sat beneath the tamarind tree near River Unyama, talking about dreams until darkness covered the fields. Sometimes they argued over foolish things. Sometimes they laughed until their stomachs hurt. And sometimes they simply sat quietly together, listening to crickets and distant drums from nearby villages. Young love had entered Lukome softly like evening rain, but hidden beneath the sweetness, danger was slowly growing. Because the older they became, the more the village began watching them seriously. In northern Uganda, friendship between children was normal, but once a boy and girl reached adulthood, people expected boundaries, respect, and family involvement. And Brian and Sharon were now crossing into that dangerous age. One Saturday afternoon, Mama Abba called Brian aside while sharpening a panga behind the house. "Sit down." Immediately, Brian became nervous. Whenever parents used that calm voice, trouble usually followed. He sat carefully on a small stool. Mama Abba continued sharpening silently for a while before speaking again. "You love Sharon?" Brian nearly choked. "Who said that?" Mama Abba laughed softly. "My son, even blind people can see." Brian looked down shyly. For a moment she studied him carefully. Then she sighed. "You have grown." Brian said nothing. Mama Abba's expression became serious. "Listen carefully. Loving a woman is easy. Keeping her happy is where real men are tested." Brian swallowed quietly. "She is a good girl," Mama Abba continued. "Do not play games with her heart. I would never. I know. But life changes people." The words stayed inside Brian's mind long after the conversation ended. That evening, he walked to the Lamaro compound, carrying fresh mangoes from their garden as an excuse to see Sharon. Okan Peter spotted him immediately. "Aha! The visitor has arrived." "Shut up!" Okan shouted loudly towards the kitchen. "Mother, your son-in-law is here." Brian nearly threw the mangoes at him. From inside the kitchen hut, Sharon burst into uncontrollable laughter. Later that night, Sharon and Brian sat outside beneath the moonlight while distant dogs barked across the village. Sharon leaned against the wooden fence quietly. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes I get scared." "Scared of what?" "That life can change suddenly." Brian looked at her. "What happened?" "Nothing. I just think too much sometimes." Brian moved closer. "No matter what happens, I will never leave you." Sharon smiled sadly. "You say that easily now. I mean it. You don't know the future." Brian gently held her hand. "Then we face the future together." Sharon wanted to believe him completely, and part of her did. But deep inside, something uneasy had started growing in her heart, almost like a warning she could not explain. Meanwhile, school life became more intense. National examinations were approaching, and pressure filled every classroom. Teachers shouted constantly about discipline and revision. "Books first," Mr. Odong yelled daily. "Love stories will not pass exams." Students laughed nervously whenever he said it because everybody knew he was indirectly referring to Brian and Sharon. One afternoon during lunch break, Sharon sat revising biology notes beneath a tree when Nancy and two other girls approached. Nancy smiled mischievously. "So, how is married life?" Sharon rolled her eyes. "You people will never rest." Another girl leaned closer dramatically. "We heard Brian nearly fought a boda rider because he smiled at you." Sharon frowned. "What?" "It happened at the trading center yesterday." That evening Sharon confronted Brian immediately. "You fought someone." Brian avoided eye contact. "It was nothing." "Brian, he was disrespecting you." "How?" "He kept asking for your number." Sharon stared at him in disbelief. "You wanted to fight over that?" Brian folded his arms stubbornly. "He annoyed me." Sharon suddenly started laughing. Brian looked offended. "What is funny? You are jealous." "I am not jealous." "Yes, you are. I was only warning him." "You nearly broke his boda. He should thank me. I was being merciful." Sharon laughed until tears formed again. Brian tried remaining serious, but eventually he laughed too. That was how they were. Even arguments somehow became moments of happiness. But not everybody celebrated their relationship. One person especially hated it deeply. Nancy. For years, she had secretly admired Brian. She loved his confidence, his humor, and the attention he received during football matches. Seeing him with Sharon felt like swallowing bitter medicine every day, and jealousy slowly began turning into resentment. One evening after classes, Nancy approached Sharon near the school gate. "You think Brian belongs only to you?" Sharon frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Nancy crossed her arms. "Boys change. Okay. One day, you will cry because of him." Sharon looked at her calmly. "If that day comes, I will handle it." Nancy smirked. "You trust him too much." Then she walked away. For the first time in weeks, Sharon felt genuinely uncomfortable. That night she could not sleep properly. The next day, things became worse. During football practice, Brian injured his ankle badly after colliding with another player. By evening, the entire school knew. Sharon ran to see him immediately. She found him sitting beneath a tree surrounded by teammates. "You are injured?" Brian tried acting strong. "It is small." But when he stood up, pain shot through his leg instantly. Sharon's face changed. "You call that small?" The boys nearby laughed quietly. One teammate whispered loudly, "Hey Brian, your wife is angry." Brian threw soil at him while Sharon ignored them completely. She helped Brian walk slowly all the way back to the village. At one point, Brian groaned dramatically. "I think I am dying." "You are not dying. My leg is finished. You only twisted your ankle. Tell my family I was a good man." Sharon burst into laughter. "You are stupid." Still, she cared for him carefully the entire week. She brought notes from school. She helped massage his ankle using herbal oil Mama Abba prepared. She even cooked for him once, though the posho accidentally became harder than bricks. Junior nearly broke a tooth trying to eat it. "Sharon wants to kill us," he complained. Even Brian struggled swallowing. But when Sharon apologized shyly, Brian forced himself to continue eating heroically. "It is nice," he lied painfully. Junior stared at him in shock. "Brother, love has destroyed your tongue." The entire compound exploded with laughter. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly, Brian's ankle healed. But something else was happening too. Their love was growing deeper than either expected. No longer childish, no longer simple. They had started imagining life beyond school, beyond Lukome, beyond village gossip and dusty roads. One evening beneath the tamarind tree, Sharon rested her head on Brian's shoulder quietly. "Promise me something, anything. If we ever leave this village, don't let the city change us." Brian looked at the setting sun across the fields. "It won't. You promise?" "I promise." Sharon closed her eyes peacefully. Neither of them knew that fate was already preparing storms stronger than promises. Far away beyond Lukome, life was moving toward them silently. And soon, their love would face tests neither childhood nor village innocence could protect them from. The year was moving fast in Lukome. The dry season had nearly ended, and dark clouds had started gathering again above the wide plains of Gulu district. The smell of rain returned slowly to the air. Farmers repaired granaries. Women prepared gardens for planting season. Every evening, thunder rolled far away like giant drums hiding behind the hills. At Lukome Secondary School, excitement filled the classrooms for another reason. The annual cultural gala was approaching. For students, the gala was bigger than examinations, bigger than sports day, and almost bigger than Christmas itself. It was the one night students from different schools gathered for music, drama, dance competitions, poetry, and celebrations that lasted until morning. For weeks, the school compound became noisy with rehearsals. Traditional drums echoed during lunch breaks. Girls practiced cultural dances beneath mango trees. Boys argued over drama scripts and football bragging rights. Even strict teachers seemed slightly happier than usual. Brian and Sharon were both heavily involved. Brian joined the Acholi traditional dance group, while Sharon participated in poetry and debate performances. Naturally, this meant they spent even more time together than before. And naturally, the teasing became unbearable. One afternoon during rehearsal, the dance instructor shouted, "Brian, stop looking at Sharon and focus on your steps." The entire group burst into laughter. Even Sharon nearly fell while dancing. Brian defended himself immediately. "I was not looking at her." "A liar," one boy shouted. "His neck bends automatically toward Sharon," another added. Brian chased them with a drumstick while everyone screamed laughing. Meanwhile, Sharon secretly enjoyed every second of it. That evening after rehearsal, heavy rain suddenly began pouring before students could leave for home. Within minutes, the entire school compound flooded with mud and running water. Students squeezed themselves inside classrooms waiting for the storm to reduce. Brian and Sharon sat near a window listening to rain hammer loudly against the iron sheets. Lightning flashed across the dark sky. For a moment, the classroom became quiet except for rainfall. Sharon leaned her chin on the window frame. "I love rain." Brian looked at her. "You only love it because you are not the one digging gardens tomorrow." She laughed softly. "No, rain makes everything feel peaceful." Outside, boys were shouting while sliding in mud like mad people. One teacher nearly fell trying to stop them. Sharon laughed harder. "Look at them." Brian smiled while watching her instead. "What? Nothing. You are staring again. You're beautiful." The words came out naturally. Sharon's laughter faded slowly. Even after months together, hearing Brian say things like that still shook her heart unexpectedly. Before she could answer, Asen suddenly appeared at the classroom door completely soaked. "Aha!" she shouted dramatically. "So this is where the secret meeting is happening." Brian groaned immediately. "Why are you everywhere?" Asen entered laughing. "Mother sent me to tell you that the rain destroyed part of the cassava shelter." Then she looked between them mischievously. "But I can come later if I interrupted romance." Sharon covered her face in embarrassment while Brian threw paper at his sister. The rain finally reduced near sunset. Students rushed home quickly before darkness arrived completely. As Brian and Sharon walked through muddy village paths, the world around them smelled fresh and alive again. Frogs croaked loudly from flooded ditches. Crickets sang from wet grass. Smoke rose from distant cooking fires. Then suddenly Sharon slipped badly in the mud. "Ah!" Before falling completely, Brian grabbed her waist instinctively. Both froze immediately. For a second, neither moved. Rainwater dripped softly from nearby leaves. Their faces remained dangerously close. Sharon could hear his breathing. Brian's hands still held her carefully. Then Okan Peter's voice exploded from behind them. "Hey!" The two jumped apart immediately. Okan stood there holding firewood on his head, laughing like a madman. "So this is why people walk slowly during rain." Brian picked up mud angrily. "I will kill you today." Okan ran instantly screaming through the road while Sharon laughed until tears formed. That night, the Lamaro home became lively because relatives from another village had arrived unexpectedly for the cultural gala weekend. The compound was filled with conversations, cooking smells, and noisy children. Among the visitors was Sharon's cousin from town, a tall, stylish boy called Collins. Unlike village boys, Collins dressed differently. He wore clean sneakers, slim trousers, and used English in almost every sentence unnecessarily. "Yo, cuz," he kept saying. The younger children immediately admired him. Even some village girls followed him around curiously because he carried a smartphone with music and videos. Brian disliked him instantly. The next morning, Collins accompanied Sharon to school for gala preparations. As they walked together laughing, Brian watched from a distance with narrowed eyes. Junior noticed immediately. "Brother, your face has changed." Brian remained silent. "Are you jealous?" "I am not jealous. Then why are you looking at that boy like a hungry lion? Brian clicked his tongue and walked away. Unfortunately for him, things became worse throughout the day. Collins stayed close to Sharon constantly. During rehearsals, he carried her bag. During lunch, he bought her soda. At one point, Brian even saw Sharon laughing while Collins whispered something in her ear. His mood darkened completely. Brian shrugged. You were busy. By evening, teammates noticed immediately. What happened to you? One boy asked during football practice. Nothing. You are kicking the ball like it insulted your ancestors. Brian nearly fought 3 boys before practice ended. Later that evening, Sharon finally found him sitting alone near the football field. You disappeared. Sharon frowned slightly. What is wrong with you? Nothing. Brian, still no answer. Then suddenly Sharon understood. A slow smile appeared on her face. Aha. Brian avoided eye contact. Are you jealous of Collins? I said nothing. Sharon sat beside him laughing softly. He is my cousin. Brian remained stubbornly quiet. You thought what exactly? He talks too much. Now Sharon laughed openly. What is your problem? He behaves like Kampala has already swallowed him. You are definitely jealous. Brian sighed heavily. I just don't like seeing other boys around you. The honesty in his voice softened Sharon immediately. She moved closer. You idiot, she whispered gently. Nobody replaces you. Brian looked at her carefully. Promise? Promise. Then she smiled mischievously. Besides, Collins fears village girls. Brian blinked. What? He said we are too strong. Brian burst into loud laughter. That part is true. Sharon hit his shoulder. The tension disappeared instantly. That night was finally the cultural gala itself. The school compound transformed beautifully with lanterns, fires, drums, and colorful decorations. Students from nearby schools arrived in large noisy groups carrying banners and singing loudly. Food vendors lined the pathways selling roasted meat, chapati, groundnuts, and sodas. Music echoed everywhere. For many students, it became the most exciting night of the year. Sharon performed first during poetry presentations. When she stepped onto the stage wearing traditional attire, the crowd became unusually quiet. Her voice flowed powerfully through the night air as she performed a touching poem about war, family, and hope in northern Uganda. Even the teachers looked impressed. Brian watched proudly from the crowd without blinking. Afterward, students cheered loudly. That is my girl, one of Brian's friends teased. Brian smiled proudly, without denying it. Later came the traditional dance competitions. Drums exploded across the grounds as Brian's dance group entered the performance area energetically. Sweat shone across his face as he danced fiercely beneath the firelight. His movements were strong and confident, drawing cheers from students and villagers alike. At one point, his eyes found Sharon standing near the front watching him, and somehow, he danced even harder. By midnight, excitement filled the entire school. Music played loudly, students danced freely, teachers struggled controlling the crowd. Meanwhile, Brian and Sharon quietly slipped away from the noise for a moment of peace. They walked toward the edge of the school field where moonlight touched the wet grass softly. Far away, drums and laughter continued echoing. Sharon wrapped her sweater tighter against the cold breeze. This night feels magical. Brian nodded, like life paused. For a few seconds they simply stood there quietly together beneath the stars. Then Sharon spoke softly. Do you ever think we are too happy? Brian frowned. What kind of question is that? I don't know. Sometimes when life becomes too good, I get scared something bad will happen. Brian gently held her hand. Nothing will happen. Sharon looked into his eyes carefully. You cannot know that. I know one thing. What? No matter what comes, I will fight for us. Sharon smiled softly, and there beneath the distant sounds of drums and celebration, Brian slowly leaned closer. Then for the very first time, he kissed her, softly, carefully. carefully, like someone touching something sacred. Sharon's heart nearly stopped. The world disappeared around them completely. No drums, no voices, no village, only the two of them beneath moonlight. When they finally pulled apart, Sharon could barely breathe properly. Brian looked equally stunned himself. Then suddenly, aha! Both jumped apart violently. Standing nearby holding roasted maize was none other than Okan Peter again. The boy stared at them dramatically. "I knew it," Brian shouted in frustration. "Why are you everywhere?" Okan Peter laughed so hard he nearly dropped his roasted maize. Brian stood frozen with embarrassment while Sharon covered her face completely. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Okan pointed dramatically at them. "So this is what happens during cultural gala." Brian picked up a small stone immediately. "If you don't disappear now, your spirit will attend classes without your body." Okan jumped backward, laughing. "I am telling my mother. You tell anyone, and I will bury you near the borehole." Okan ran away, screaming happily through the darkness. "Lovers, lovers." Sharon nearly collapsed from embarrassment. "Aye, Brian, we are finished." Brian rubbed his forehead. "That boy is a curse from heaven." Despite the panic, both eventually burst into laughter. The night air felt colder now, but somehow sweeter too. For a few moments they simply stood quietly together beneath the moonlight, both replaying the kiss again and again inside their minds. Neither wanted to say it aloud, but everything had changed. The innocence of childhood is gone completely now. This was real love. Deep, dangerous, beautiful. Back at the gala, music still shook the school grounds wildly. Students danced in circles around fires while teachers pretended not to notice couples disappearing into dark corners. Collins spotted Sharon and Brian returning together and smirked knowingly. "Aha," he said dramatically. "The village romance movie continues." Sharon rolled her eyes. "You talk too much." Collins laughed. "I knew already." Brian frowned suspiciously. "Knew what?" "That you two are in deep trouble." Sharon blinked. "What trouble?" Collins leaned closer teasingly. "The kind where people stop thinking properly." Brian threw a plastic bottle at him while everybody laughed. But deep inside, Collins' joke carried truth. Because after that first kiss, Brian and Sharon truly stopped thinking normally around each other. The following days became dangerous for their concentration. At school, they stared too long at each other during lessons. During group discussions, they forgot assignments completely. Even teachers noticed. One afternoon, Mr. Odong stopped teaching mathematics halfway and looked directly at Brian. "You," Brian stood up immediately. "Yes, sir. If staring at Sharon could pass examinations, you would already become Minister of Education." The entire class exploded with laughter. Even Sharon nearly fell from her chair laughing. Brian wanted the ground to open and swallow him whole. Unfortunately, the teasing only became worse after that. Students now intentionally coughed whenever Brian and Sharon sat close together. Girls sang wedding songs when Sharon entered class. Some boys even started calling Brian Pastor of Love Ministries. One morning, Brian arrived late carrying sugarcane for break time. Before he even sat down, Ojara shouted loudly, "Hey Brian, did Sharon approve the sugarcane first?" The class erupted again. Brian sighed heavily. "My enemies are too many." Yet despite all the embarrassment, he secretly loved it, because for the first time in his life, happiness felt complete. Meanwhile, outside school, life in Lukome continued normally. The rainy season returned fully. Heavy storms soaked the village almost every evening. Roads became muddy rivers. Frogs sang loudly through the night. Women struggled drying cassava flour properly because sunshine rarely lasted long. One weekend, Otima Okello decided the entire family would plant simsim before rains became worse. Nobody liked those announcements, especially Brian. Early Saturday morning, Mama Abba entered the hut, banging saucepans loudly. "Wake up, gardens are not for lazy people." Brian groaned painfully. "Mother, even prisoners sleep better. You will sleep forever after death. Wake up." Outside, the compound buzzed with activity. Junior carried hose dramatically like a soldier going to war. Asen tied a scarf around her head while complaining non-stop. Then Sharon appeared at the gate carrying her own hoe. Brian immediately became energetic. Junior stared in disbelief. "Amazing," he whispered. "Love is stronger than sleep." The gardens lay nearly 2 kilometers from the village near a swampy area surrounded by tall grass. By mid-morning, everyone was covered in mud and sweat. Otima worked silently and seriously like a machine. Meanwhile, Brian purposely worked near Sharon. Most times he actually slowed down just to continue talking to her. Mama Abba noticed everything. At one point, she whispered to Asen, "Look there." Asen laughed quietly. "They are pretending to plant while discussing romance." Indeed, Brian and Sharon were barely concentrating. "You planted Simsim too close together," Sharon complained. "You are distracting me. I am distracting you by existing." "Yes." Sharon laughed softly. "You are hopeless." Then suddenly Brian swung his hoe carelessly and slipped in mud. Whoop! He landed flat directly inside a wet trench. Mud splashed everywhere. Even Otima stopped working. For 2 seconds, silence covered the garden. Then everybody exploded with laughter. Junior fell onto the ground screaming, "Ooh, legendary fall." Sharon laughed so hard she could barely stand. Brian sat inside the mud looking deeply betrayed by life. "Laugh," he said dramatically. "Continue laughing while I die." Even Mama Abba wiped tears from her eyes. That story spread across Lukome before sunset. By evening, children were already demonstrating Brian's famous mud attack to each other near the trading center. Brian threatened violence against everyone. Still, Sharon could not stop teasing him. "I have never seen someone fight soil and lose. You are enjoying my suffering too much. You looked like a trapped hippo." Brian chased her around the compound again while villagers watched, smiling. Those simple days became the heartbeat of their love. No expensive gifts, no luxury. Just laughter, muddy roads, long walks, and endless conversations beneath village skies. But quietly, hidden beneath the sweetness, life was preparing its first real storm. It began with examinations. Senior 4 final exams approached quickly, bringing fear across the school. Students revised late into the night. Teachers became stricter than ever. Parents prayed constantly for good results. For Brian and Sharon, the pressure felt especially heavy. Their families had sacrificed a lot for school fees. Failure was not an option. One evening, Brian and Sharon sat beneath the tamarind tree revising notes together under a small solar lamp Collins had left behind during his visit. The night felt unusually calm. Distant drums echoed softly from another village. Fireflies blinked across the grass like floating stars. Sharon closed her notebook tiredly. "My head is full." Brian stretched. "If mathematics enters my brain again, I may start speaking numbers." Sharon laughed softly. Then her expression slowly became serious. "Brian, what if we fail?" "We won't. But what if?" Brian looked at her carefully. For the first time in weeks, fear showed clearly in her eyes. He moved closer gently. "Listen to me. We have survived village gossip, Okan's madness, football injuries, your cooking. My cooking is improving. It nearly killed Junior." Sharon laughed despite herself. Brian continued softly. "We are stronger than our exams." Sharon stared at him quietly. Then she leaned her head onto his shoulder. "I don't want us to separate." The words came out almost like a whisper. Brian's chest tightened. In villages like Lukome, education often separated people forever. Some passed and left for cities. Some remained behind. Some changed completely after success. and both of them knew it. Brian gently held her hand. "No matter where life takes us, you are part of me now." Sharon closed her eyes slowly. Above them, the moon shone quietly through moving clouds, and somewhere deep in the darkness beyond Lukome, fate continued moving patiently toward them. The examination season arrived like war. Suddenly, laughter disappeared from Lukome Secondary School. The noisy classrooms became silent. Students walked carrying books everywhere like pastors carrying Bibles. Even stubborn boys who normally played football every evening now revised beneath trees, whispering formulas to themselves. Fear covered the school like smoke. Teachers stopped joking completely. "Your future is sitting inside these papers," Mr. Odong warned every morning. "One mistake can change your entire life." For Brian and Sharon, the pressure became unbearable. Every evening after digging or household chores, they revised together beneath the tamarind tree or inside Bosco Lamaro's sitting hut using weak solar light. Some nights they studied so long that crickets stopped singing before they noticed time passing. Still, they tried keeping their usual humor alive. One evening while revising chemistry, Brian stared at a formula for nearly 5 minutes silently. Sharon noticed. "What happened?" Brian looked exhausted. "I think chemistry hates me personally." Sharon laughed. "You said the same thing yesterday." "Look at this nonsense," Brian complained dramatically. "Why should oxygen marry hydrogen twice before becoming water?" Sharon burst into laughter so loudly, Mama Ekelo shouted from the kitchen. "What is funny there?" "Brian is fighting science again," Sharon replied. Even Mama Ekelo laughed from outside. Despite the stress, those late-night revision sessions became some of their most beautiful memories. Sometimes they compete by answering questions. Sometimes they argued over English essays. Sometimes Brian intentionally gave wrong answers just to make Sharon angry. "You are useless," Sharon complained one night. "I am creative. You wrote that Lake Victoria is found in Kenya. I was testing if you are awake. You will test poverty soon." Brian laughed so hard he nearly fell from the chair. But beneath the jokes, fear remained real. Both understood that examinations could decide whether their dreams survived or died. Finally, the first examination day arrived. Students gathered nervously outside classrooms before sunrise. Some revised desperately at the last minute. Others prayed loudly. A few looked ready to faint. Brian tried acting calm, but Sharon noticed his hands shaking slightly. "You are scared." "I am not scared." "You are sweating." "It is hot." "It is 7 a.m. Brian sighed heavily. "Okay, maybe a small fear." Sharon smiled softly. "You will do fine." Then secretly, before entering the exam room, she squeezed his hand quickly. That tiny gesture somehow calmed him more than anything else. The examinations lasted weeks. Mathematics nearly killed half the students. History papers caused actual tears. After chemistry exams, one boy walked out muttering to himself like a madman. "I saw things in that paper that were not taught on this earth." Even teachers looked stressed afterward. Finally, the last paper ended. The moment students left examination rooms, the entire school exploded into celebration. Books flew into the air. People screamed. Some danced wildly. Brian lifted Sharon off the ground, spinning her around while students cheered loudly. "We survived. For now," Sharon laughed. That evening, Lukome Village celebrated like a festival. Parents slaughtered chickens. Children played music loudly. Even Otima Okello smiled proudly for the first time in weeks. "You worked hard," he told Brian quietly. "I am proud of you." Those words meant everything to Brian. In African homes, fathers rarely expressed emotions openly, so hearing that felt like receiving an award. After exams ended, life slowed down again temporarily. Students waited months for results. Meanwhile, Normal village life returned. Brian helped more in cattle grazing and farming. Sharon assisted her mother at the trading center selling simsim paste and silverfish. And because school pressure disappeared, their relationship grew even deeper. Now they spent nearly every evening together. Sometimes they walked through gardens discussing dreams. Sometimes they sat near River Unyama watching sunset reflections dance on the water. And sometimes they simply enjoyed silence together. One Sunday afternoon after church, Brian and Sharon joined other youths playing volleyball near the trading center. The match quickly became chaotic. Nobody followed rules properly. Half the players argued constantly. At one point, Okan hit the ball so badly, it landed inside old Mama Alice's cooking pot. The old woman chased everyone with a stick. "You demons want to destroy my lunch?" People scattered, laughing in all directions. Meanwhile, Brian intentionally showed off whenever Sharon watched him play. He jumped unnecessarily high, dived dramatically for easy balls, even removed his shirt at one point pretending heat was killing him. Sharon noticed immediately. "You are showing off." Brian grinned proudly. "It is working. You look like a struggling goat." Still, Sharon could not stop smiling while watching him. That evening after the game, the two walked home slowly through narrow village paths glowing orange under sunset. Children chased tires nearby. Women returned from gardens carrying firewood. Smoke rose peacefully across Lukome. Then suddenly Sharon spoke quietly. "Do you ever think about marriage?" Brian nearly tripped over a stone. "What?" Sharon laughed immediately. "Relax. I only asked. You ask dangerous questions casually. I am serious." Brian looked ahead thoughtfully. "In the future, yes. With who?" Brian stared at her dramatically. "You ask foolish things sometimes." Sharon smiled softly. Then her expression became thoughtful again. "I want a family one day. You will have one. I want children who grow up differently from us." "What do you mean?" Sharon kicked dust gently from the road. "I don't want them struggling for school fees every term. I don't want them walking barefoot long distances like we did." Brian listened quietly. "And I don't want them fearing the future all the time." Brian stopped walking. Then gently, he turned her toward him. "We will build that life." Sharon looked into his eyes carefully. "You really believe that?" "Yes." "How?" Brian smiled slightly. "I don't know yet." That answer made Sharon laugh. "You are impossible." But secretly, she believed him. That was the dangerous thing about Brian Okello. When he spoke about the future, people wanted to trust him. Weeks passed peacefully. Then one morning, everything changed. Results day arrived. News spread through Lukome before sunrise. Results are out. Students ran wildly between homes shouting updates. Parents gathered anxiously around radios and trading centers waiting for announcements. Brian's stomach twisted painfully all morning. Even Sharon looked pale with fear. Together they traveled to school where crowds of students already surrounded notice boards. The atmosphere felt electric. Some students prayed quietly. Others looked ready to cry already. Teachers struggled controlling the pushing crowd. Finally, result sheets were pinned onto the board. Chaos exploded instantly. Students screamed names. Some jumped with excitement. Others collapsed in disappointment. Brian and Sharon fought through the crowd nervously. Then suddenly Sharon grabbed Brian's arm tightly. "Brian, what?" Her voice shook. "We passed." Brian stared at the paper desperately. And there they were. Brian Okello first grade. Sharon Lamaro first grade. For several seconds neither moved. Then Sharon screamed loudly and hugged him without caring who watched. Brian laughed in disbelief. "We did it." Around them students celebrated wildly. Some cried openly. Others danced. One boy fainted after discovering he failed mathematics completely. Meanwhile, Brian and Sharon remained lost in their own happiness. Their hard work had finally paid off. But then came the bigger shock. Mr. Odong pushed through the crowd carrying another paper. "Brian, yes sir? You have been selected. Selected for government sponsorship." Brian froze completely. Government sponsorship meant something huge. It meant advanced level education in a top school. It meant opportunity, escape, a future beyond village struggle. Sharon's eyes widened immediately. "Where?" Mr. Odong adjusted his glasses proudly. "Kampala." Silence. The word hit both of them differently. Kampala, the city, the dream Brian always spoke about. For a moment, excitement battled fear inside Sharon's chest, because suddenly the future no longer felt distant. It was arriving fast, very fast, and deep down, both of them knew life was about to change forever. The news of Brian's government sponsorship spread through Lukome Village faster than wildfire during the dry season. By sunset, everybody already knew. Women at the borehole discussed it proudly. Old men drinking a John praised Otima Okello loudly. Even children ran around shouting, "Brian is going to Kampala." For the Okello family, it was one of the proudest moments they had ever experienced. That evening, their compound filled with visitors bringing congratulations. Neighbors arrived carrying cassava, groundnuts, and even chickens as gifts. In villages like Lukome, success belonged to everybody. Otima tried acting calm, but happiness showed clearly on his face. "My son has opened a door for this family," he told visitors proudly. Mama Abba nearly cried twice while serving food. Meanwhile, Junior behaved as if he personally won the scholarship. "My brother will become rich," he announced everywhere. "When he buys a car, I will sit in front," Asen laughed. "With your dirty feet, he will lock you in the boot." The compound exploded with laughter. Across the stream, the Lamaro family also celebrated warmly. Bosco Lamaro adjusted his glasses proudly while listening to the news on radio again just to confirm it. "You see," he told Sharon, "education changes lives." Mama Okello smiled knowingly at Sharon. But unlike everybody else, Sharon's happiness carried fear hidden underneath. Because Kampala suddenly stopped being a dream. Now it was real, and real things could take people away forever. That night, after visitors finally left, Sharon quietly slipped out of her compound and walked toward the tamarind tree near River Unyama. She already knew Brian would be there, and she was right. He sat beneath the tree staring at the moonlit water silently. When he saw her approaching, his face softened immediately. "You disappeared. Too many people at home." Brian smiled. "Same." Sharon sat beside him quietly. For a while, neither spoke. The night felt peaceful. Crickets sang through the grass while distant drums echoed softly from another village celebration. Finally, Brian broke the silence. "Kampala." Sharon looked at him. "You sound shocked?" "Yes, I am shocked." Then he laughed softly. "Sometimes I still feel like the same boy who used to chase grasshoppers with you. You still behave like him sometimes." Brian smiled. "But now everything feels different." Sharon nodded slowly. "Yes." A heavy silence followed. Brian noticed immediately. "What is wrong?" "Nothing." "Sharon." She looked down at her hands quietly. "You will leave." The words came out softer than she intended. Brian's smile faded gently. "I will come back." "You don't know that." "I do. Kampala changes people." Brian frowned slightly. "Who told you that?" "Everybody." She looked toward the river. "People leave villages and return acting differently. Some never even come back." Brian moved closer. "I am not people." Sharon laughed sadly. "That is exactly what everybody says before leaving." The honesty in her voice hit him deeply. For the first time, Brian fully understood her fear. Not fear of distance, fear of losing him completely. He gently reached for her hand. "Listen to me carefully." Sharon remained quiet. "No city can make me forget where I came from. He squeezed her fingers softly. "And no city can make me forget you." Sharon's eyes watered slightly, though she tried hiding it. Brian noticed anyway. Why are you crying now?" "I am not crying. You are. It is dust." "At night?" Sharon laughed weakly while wiping her eyes. Brian pulled her gently closer. "I love you." The words still carried power every single time he said them. Sharon rested her head against his shoulder quietly. "I love you too." Above them, clouds drifted slowly across the moon, and somewhere inside both their hearts, excitement and fear continued battling silently, because dreams were finally beginning. But dreams often demanded sacrifice first. The following weeks became busy with preparations. Brian received admission letters, school requirements, and endless instructions from teachers. Suddenly, everybody had advice. Do not trust city girls. Protect your bag in taxis. Never eat street meat. Kampala thieves even steal shoes from your feet. The stories became so dramatic that Junior started believing Kampala was another planet. One afternoon he asked seriously, "Brother, do buildings there touch heaven?" Brian laughed loudly. "Who told you that?" Okan said people in Kampala sleep upstairs. Achan nearly fell from laughter. Meanwhile, Otima and Mama Abba struggled financially preparing for Brian's departure. Though sponsorship covered tuition, many other things still required money: mattresses, uniforms, transport, books, shoes. Otima even sold 2 goats quietly. Brian noticed immediately. "You sold the white goats?" Otima nodded simply. They were old, but Brian knew the truth. His father was sacrificing deeply for his future. That realization added pressure inside his chest. Failure was no longer an option. Meanwhile, Sharon helped Brian prepare almost every day. They visited Gulu town once to buy necessities for school. For both of them, the trip felt exciting and emotional. Brian had rarely traveled beyond nearby districts before. Inside the taxi, he kept staring through windows at busy roads, motorcycles, shops, and crowds. "Imagine Kampala is bigger than this," Sharon said. Brian shook his head. "I cannot even picture it." At the market, Sharon helped him choose clothes while teasing him endlessly. "This shirt makes you look like a church elder." "What is wrong with church elders? You are 18, not 60. Brian laughed. Later, they entered a supermarket for the first time together. Everything amazed Brian. Automatic doors nearly caused him a heart attack. "Hey!" It opened itself. Sharon laughed uncontrollably. "You behave like a village ambassador." Then things became worse near an escalator. Brian stopped completely. "What is this?" "It is the stairs. They are moving." "Yes." "Why?" Sharon laughed so hard nearby shoppers started staring. "Do you fear escalators? They can swallow people." "Brian, I am serious." Eventually Sharon dragged him onto it while he held the railings like someone crossing a dangerous bridge. By the time they reached the top floor, Sharon was crying from laughter. "You nearly prayed halfway. I saw death." That story entertained Lukome for weeks after they returned. Even Otima laughed after hearing it. "My son fought the stairs and survived." As departure day approached, emotions inside the village became heavier, especially for Sharon. Though she tried remaining cheerful, small things suddenly hurt deeply. Every goodbye conversation felt dangerous. Every sunset together felt temporary. One evening near the River Unyama, she asked quietly, "When will you come back?" "During holidays." "That is long." Brian looked at her carefully. "We will talk every chance we get." Sharon sighed. "You know the network in Lukome behaves like a sick chicken." Brian smiled sadly. "It will work somehow." Then he became serious. "You trust me?" "Yes." "No matter what people say?" "Yes." "No matter the distance?" Sharon nodded slowly. "I trust you." Brian kissed her forehead gently. At that moment, both truly believed love alone could defeat distance. Neither understood yet how cruel separation could become. Finally, the departure day arrived. The entire morning felt emotional. Mama Abba woke before sunrise, preparing food for the journey. Asen secretly cried while packing Brian's clothes properly. Junior pretended bravery but remained unusually quiet. Even Otima looked older somehow that morning. At the Lamaro home, Sharon barely touched breakfast. Mama Akello watched her carefully. "You love him deeply." Sharon looked embarrassed. Mama Akello sighed softly. "Then pray for him. The world outside villages is not simple." Those words stayed in Sharon's mind painfully. By mid-morning, villagers gathered near the roadside where buses passed toward Kampala. People hugged Brian repeatedly. Old men blessed him. Children admired his suitcase like treasure. Then finally, the bus appeared in the distance, raising dust behind it. Suddenly, everything became real. Very real. Mama Abba started crying openly. Junior hugged Brian tightly. "Do not forget us when you become rich." Brian laughed emotionally. "I can never forget you." Then his eyes searched immediately for Sharon. She stood slightly behind the others, unusually quiet. For a second, the noise around them disappeared completely. Brian walked toward her slowly. Neither spoke immediately. Too many emotions crowded the moment. Finally, Sharon forced a smile. "So, Kampala boy." Brian smiled weakly. "Village girl." Her eyes immediately filled with tears again. Now you're making me cry." Brian gently wiped one tear from her cheek. "I will come back. You promised too much." "I mean it." People nearby pretended not to watch them while secretly watching everything. Then the conductor shouted loudly, "Kampala, Kampala, we are leaving." Time had run out. Brian hugged Sharon tightly for the first time in front of everyone. And for those few seconds, neither cared who was watching. Then slowly, he let go, picked up his suitcase, and climbed onto the bus. Sharon stood frozen as the engine started. Brian leaned near the window, searching for her face one last time. The bus began moving slowly down the dusty road. Villagers waved loudly. Mama Abba cried harder. Junior chased the bus briefly before stopping breathlessly. And Sharon remained standing silently beneath the hot northern Uganda sun, watching the boy she loved disappear toward Kampala. Toward dreams. Toward a new life. Toward a future neither of them could yet imagine. For the first time in his life, Brian Okello felt truly small. As the bus entered Kampala late in the evening, his eyes remained glued to the window like a child seeing magic for the first time. Everything moved too fast. Too many cars, too many people, too much noise. Buildings stood high above the roads like giants. Bright lights flashed everywhere. Boda-bodas squeezed between vehicles recklessly, while conductors shouted destinations at the top of their lungs. Wandegeya, Wandegeya, Natite, Natite, move inside, move inside. Brian tightened his grip on his suitcase nervously. The city looked alive, but also dangerous. Back in Lukome, nights became quiet after sunset except for crickets and distant drums. Kampala never seemed to sleep. Even the air smelled different. Fuel, roasted meat, dust, perfume, rainwater, and smoke all mixed together. As passengers stepped off the bus, Brian nearly lost balance after a boda-boda brushed past him. "Watch," the rider shouted before speeding away. Brian stared after him in shock. "These people are mad." The conductor laughed. "You are new in Kampala, eh?" Brian nodded carefully. The man pointed ahead. "If you survive boda-bodas, you survive Kampala." That sentence alone almost sent Brian back to Gulu immediately. Luckily, one of the teachers from his new school had arranged transport for students arriving from upcountry districts. Soon Brian found himself squeezed inside a crowded school van, alongside nervous strangers carrying mattresses and suitcases. Nobody talked much. Everybody looked overwhelmed. Rain began falling lightly as the van moved through city roads glowing with headlights and neon signs. Brian stared silently outside. Deep inside, excitement battled loneliness. For years he had dreamed of leaving Lukome, but now that he is finally here, he suddenly missed home terribly. He missed River Unyama. He missed village evenings. He missed Mama Abba shouting at Junior. And more than anything, he missed Sharon. Back in Lukome, Sharon's days immediately became emptier. The first morning after Brian left felt strange and painful. For years, she had grown used to seeing him almost every day on village roads, at school, near the trading center, beneath the tamarind tree. Now suddenly, there was only silence. Even the walk to the borehole felt incomplete. Sharon, one old woman teased kindly. Your face looks like someone stole your goat. Sharon forced a smile. I am fine. But she was not fine. That evening she walked alone toward River Unyama out of habit. When she reached the tamarind tree, sadness hit her heavily. The place felt too quiet without Brian's laughter. She sat there alone until sunset, tracing lines in the soil absent-mindedly. Then quietly, she whispered, "Idiot, you better not change." Meanwhile, Brian's first days in Kampala became chaotic. The school itself shocked him immediately. Huge dormitories, hundreds of students, electricity everywhere, flush toilets, even food arrived differently. The first time he entered the dining hall, he stood frozen holding a plate while students moved around confidently. A boy nearby laughed. "Village boy?" Brian frowned. "What? You look confused." "I am not confused." "Then why are you staring at rice like it insulted your ancestors?" The surrounding boys burst into laughter. Brian nearly fought him immediately, but another student intervened, smiling. "Relax. The first days are hard for everybody." That student introduced himself as Dennis Mwine, a funny outgoing boy from Mbarara who quickly became Brian's first real friend in Kampala. Unlike many city students, Dennis never mocked Brian seriously. Instead, he enjoyed teaching him survival tricks. Rule number 1, Dennis explained dramatically one evening, never trust Kampala girls. Brian laughed. "Why does everybody keep saying that?" "Because they can finish your heart and school fees together." Brian shook his head, smiling. "You people exaggerate too much." Dennis looked suspicious immediately. "Uh-huh. You left someone in the village?" Brian smiled quietly, without answering. Dennis pointed excitedly. "I knew it." Soon the entire dormitory learned about Sharon, mostly because Brian could not stop talking about her accidentally. One night, while students were discussing relationships, someone casually asked, "So, Brian, your girl is beautiful?" Brian answered too quickly. "Very." The boys screamed immediately. "Ooh, he is finished." Dennis fell dramatically from his bed, laughing. "Look at this man smiling alone." Brian threw a shoe at him while everybody laughed loudly. Despite the teasing, Brian secretly enjoyed speaking about Sharon. Talking about her made Kampala feel less lonely, and thankfully, they still communicated regularly, at least when the network allowed. Most evenings, Brian searched desperately for better signals around the school compound just to call her. Sometimes he climbed near water tanks. Sometimes he walked toward the gate. One night, he nearly fell into drainage while trying to hear properly. Still, hearing Sharon's voice always made everything better. Kampala has swallowed your accent already," Sharon teased during one call. Brian laughed. "You are imagining things. You said basically 3 times. People speak English here too much. So now you are a city man?" "Never." Sharon smiled softly through the phone. "Good." Those conversations became their lifeline. They talked about everything. Village gossip, school struggles, Junior's foolishness, Okan stealing chickens again. Brian described city life dramatically, while Sharon laughed endlessly. One building has stairs moving by themselves again, Brian complained once. Sharon nearly died laughing. Do you still fear escalators? They are unnatural. But life in Kampala slowly began changing Brian in small, invisible ways. Not bad changes at first, just adjustments. He started speaking more English naturally. He learned how to use taxis confidently. He stopped staring at tall buildings like miracles. And slowly, city life began opening his eyes wider. He met students from wealthy families, people who had traveled abroad, students who used laptops casually, girls who dressed confidently and spoke fearlessly. One of those girls was Vanessa. Vanessa Nakanwagi was smart, beautiful, and impossible to ignore. She came from a rich Kampala family and carried herself with confidence that intimidated many boys. Unlike village girls, Vanessa spoke directly, laughed loudly, and looked people straight in the eyes without fear. During debates and class discussions, she often challenged teachers openly. Brian noticed her immediately. Everybody did. One afternoon during literature class, Brian answered a difficult question perfectly. After class, Vanessa approached him. "You are clever." Brian looked surprised. "Thank you. You are from Gulu, right?" "Yes. I like your confidence." Brian smiled politely. "Thanks." Then she added casually, "You should join the debate club." Before Brian answered, Dennis suddenly appeared from nowhere looking alarmed. "Brother," he whispered dramatically after Vanessa left. "Danger." Brian laughed. "What? That girl destroys men. You people fear women too much." Dennis shook his head seriously. "I am telling you now, rich Kampala girls are another species." Brian ignored him completely. To him, Vanessa was simply a classmate, nothing more. At least, that is what he believed then. Back in Lukome, Sharon continued waiting faithfully. But loneliness was becoming harder. Everywhere she looked reminded her of Brian. The football field, the tamarind tree, even village roads felt empty. And unfortunately, village gossip had started again. Some women whispered carelessly near the borehole. Long-distance relationships never survive. City girls will finish that boy quickly. Men change fast after reaching Kampala. Sharon pretended confidence publicly, but privately, those words hurt deeply. One evening while helping her mother cook, she finally asked quietly, "Mama, can people really change that much?" Mama Akello studied her carefully. Yes, the answer came too honestly. Sharon's chest tightened. "But not everybody changes badly," Mama Akello added softly. "Sometimes, life simply moves people differently." That night, Sharon failed to sleep properly. For the first time since Brian left, fear truly entered her heart. And far away in Kampala, surrounded by bright lights and endless noise, Brian himself did not yet realize how much his life was beginning to shift. Kampala changed people slowly. Not all at once, not in obvious ways. The city worked quietly, like water wearing down stone over time. At first, Brian still behaved exactly like the village boy from Lukome. He called home constantly, laughed loudly at simple things, and avoided unnecessary attention from girls. But month after month, life in Kampala kept pulling him into a different rhythm. Classes became harder, schedules became tighter, debate clubs, assignments, school trips, new friendships, everything moved fast. Sometimes entire days passed before he realized he had not called Sharon. At first, he always apologized sincerely. "Ayi, forgive me," he said during one late-night call. "We had debate competitions." Sharon smiled softly through the weak network. "It's okay." And honestly, at first, it really was okay. She understood he was busy. But slowly, the gaps between calls started growing longer. 3 days, 5 days. Whenever Sharon asked why, Brian always had explanations. Schoolwork, network, power blackout, group discussions. Most of them were true. But another truth had also begun quietly entering his life. Vanessa. Vanessa had a way of making people feel important when she spoke to them. She was confident without trying too hard, funny without forcing jokes, and unlike many students from wealthy families, she treated Brian with genuine respect. That surprised him. One afternoon after debate practice, heavy rain trapped students inside the school hall. Most students complained loudly while waiting. Vanessa sat beside Brian casually. "You always look serious." Brian laughed softly. "I am not serious." "Yes, you are." "No, you even think before laughing." Brian smiled. "That is because you people in Kampala laugh too much." Vanessa burst into laughter. "You still call us you people. You are different." "How?" Brian looked outside toward the rain. "In the village, life is slower. Here everybody behaves like they are racing." Vanessa studied him carefully. "You miss home." The words caught him off guard. "A little." "A little?" Brian sighed. "Okay, a lot." Vanessa smiled gently. "You know what I like about you?" "What?" "You're honest." Nobody had ever described him that way before. The conversation stayed in Brian's mind longer than expected. Meanwhile, in Lukome, Sharon fought loneliness silently. She tried focusing on her own studies and responsibilities, but evenings became painful, especially at night, because nights were once their time together. Now she often sat alone beneath the tamarind tree, listening to frogs and crickets while staring at her silent phone. Some nights Brian called, some nights he did not, and every time he delayed, fear grew a little deeper. One evening, Okan found her sitting near River Unyama alone. "You are thinking too much again." Sharon rolled her eyes. "Go away." Okan sat beside her anyway. "You miss him badly. Mind your business." Okan surprisingly became serious. "You know, Brian is not stupid." Sharon looked at him quietly. "He loves you," Okan continued. "Even goats in Lukome know." Sharon smiled weakly. "But cities change people." Okan picked up a stone thoughtfully. "Maybe, but sometimes fear changes people first." The words stayed in Sharon's mind long after he left. Back in Kampala, the first real crack appeared unexpectedly. It happened during a school trip. Brian's class traveled to Jinja for an academic conference. For many students, it became more exciting than education. People took pictures constantly, laughed loudly on buses, and treated the trip like a holiday. Vanessa and Brian ended up sitting together during most of the journey. At first it happened naturally because debate club members grouped themselves together. But later, Brian noticed he actually enjoyed her company. Too much. She understood his ambitions. She challenged his ideas. And unlike village conversations, life with her felt connected to the future he dreamed about. One evening after conference activities ended, students gathered near the Nile River taking photos and joking around. Vanessa stood beside the water quietly. "It's beautiful," she said. Brian nodded. "In Lukome, we only have the Unyama River. You talk about your village like it's heaven." Brian smiled slightly, maybe because part of me is still there. Vanessa turned toward him. "And the other part?" Brian hesitated. He did not know why that question suddenly felt dangerous. Before he answered, Dennis interrupted loudly from behind. "Aha, I knew I would find you two together." Vanessa laughed while Brian looked annoyed. Dennis pulled Brian aside dramatically later that night. "My brother." "What?" "You're playing with fire." Brian frowned. "It is not like that." Dennis stared at him carefully. "Then why do you smile differently around her?" Brian immediately looked away. That reaction alone scared him, because for the first time, he realized Dennis might be right. A few days later, Sharon called unexpectedly while Brian studied with Vanessa in the library. His phone vibrated repeatedly across the table. Vanessa noticed the name immediately. "Do you have a girlfriend?" Brian picked up the phone quickly. "Yes." Vanessa smiled politely. "The famous village girl." Brian blinked. How do you know about her? Dennis talks too much. Brian laughed awkwardly. The phone kept vibrating, but instead of answering immediately, he silenced it. That tiny action lasted only seconds, yet somehow it felt bigger than it should have. Later that night, he finally called Sharon back. You ignored my calls. I was studying. With who? Brian hesitated too long. With classmates, girls. Brian laughed nervously, both boys and girls. Silence. Then Sharon spoke quietly. There is someone there, isn't there? The question hit him unexpectedly hard. What? A girl. Brian rubbed his forehead. You're overthinking. Am I wrong? He should have answered immediately. But that 1 second of hesitation changed everything. Sharon noticed it instantly, and deep down, something inside her heart cracked painfully. After that conversation, things between them became heavier. Not openly bad, but it is no longer easy. Calls felt strained sometimes. Jealousy entered conversations more often. Small misunderstandings became bigger than before. One evening, Sharon asked casually, "What were you doing today?" Brian answered carelessly, "We were practicing debates with Vanessa and others." Silence. Then Sharon replied, "You mention her a lot these days." Brian sighed immediately. "Please don't start. I only said you always assume bad things now. Because you are changing. I am not changing. Brian, you ignored my calls. I told you I was busy. With her." Brian stood up angrily from his bed. "You don't trust me anymore." Sharon's voice softened painfully. "I am trying to." That sentence hurt him more than shouting would have. Because deep down, he himself no longer fully trusted his own feelings. Weeks passed, and slowly, distance started becoming more than physical. Sometimes Brian genuinely missed Sharon deeply. He missed her laughter, her stubbornness, her village humor. But at the same time, another world was pulling him forward. A world of ambition, opportunities, new people, new dreams. And increasingly, Vanessa became part of that world. One Saturday afternoon, she invited several classmates to her family home for group discussions. Brian almost refused, but Dennis forced him. "My friend, rich people's food heals depression." The house shocked Brian completely. Huge gates, beautiful gardens, furniture that looked too expensive to touch. Even bathrooms smelled rich somehow. Brian whispered to Dennis privately, "If I break something here, my entire clan will pay." Dennis nearly collapsed laughing. Vanessa's family welcomed everyone warmly. Still, Brian felt awkward the entire afternoon, especially when Vanessa's father asked casually, "So Brian, what does your father do?" "Farming." "Ah, good honest work." The man meant well, but Brian suddenly became painfully aware of how different his world was from theirs. Later that evening, after other students left, Vanessa walked Brian toward the gate. "You were quiet today." "I am not used to places like this." Vanessa smiled softly. "You don't need to be." Brian looked down thoughtfully. "You and I come from different worlds." Vanessa stared at him for a second. "Maybe, but you think bigger than most people I know." Those words hit him deeply, because all his life, Brian had dreamed of escaping limitations, and for the first time someone from that bigger world seemed to truly see him. Back in Lukome, under the quiet northern Uganda sky, Sharon sat alone beneath the tamarind tree, again holding her silent phone, waiting and hoping, slowly beginning to feel something terrifying. The fear that love alone might not be enough anymore. By the time first-term holidays arrived, almost 8 months had passed since Brian left Lukome for Kampala. 8 long months. To the villagers, it felt like a short season. To Sharon, it felt like years. The excitement of Brian's return spread across Lukome days before he even arrived. Junior announced the news everywhere like a radio presenter. "My brother is coming back Saturday." Even old Mama Alice heard the news and laughed. So Kampala has finally released him. Children became excited too, because whenever students returned from the city, they usually brought strange stories, fashionable clothes, and sometimes sweets. But nobody waited more anxiously than Sharon. The entire week before his arrival, she could barely sleep properly. Part of her was excited, another part was terrified, because although they still talked, something between them had changed over the months, not completely broken, just unfamiliar. And deep down, Sharon feared seeing proof of it with her own eyes. Saturday morning arrived bright and hot. Dust rose along village roads as bodas passed carrying sacks of charcoal and market goods. Women swept compounds while goats wandered lazily between huts. Around midday, word spread quickly. The bus has reached the trading center. Junior sprinted through the village barefoot, shouting like someone escaping bees. He is here! He is here! At the Okello compound, Mama Aba quickly adjusted her gomesi while pretending not to panic. Otima sat calmly outside, sharpening a panga, though he had already checked the road 10 times. Then finally, Brian appeared at the gate carrying a backpack and suitcase. Immediately, Junior attacked him with a hug powerful enough to nearly knock him down. "Brother," Brian laughed loudly for the first time in months. You have grown heavier." Mama Aba hugged him tightly next. Even Otima smiled openly while shaking his hand proudly. "You look strong," Brian grinned. Kampala food. But everybody noticed it instantly. Brian had changed. Not badly, but noticeably. His hair was cleaner and more stylish now. His clothes fit differently. He wore sneakers that looked expensive compared to village standards. Even his posture carried new confidence. And his English, i.e., the English, had multiplied. Within minutes, Asen started laughing. Listen to him saying basically again. Junior shook his head dramatically. Kampala has entered his mouth. Brian laughed while denying everything. But secretly, even he could feel the difference. Lukome suddenly seemed smaller than he remembered. Quieter too. Still beautiful. Still home. But somehow, smaller. Then his eyes searched automatically for one person. "Where is Sharon?" Junior smirked immediately. "Aha!" Mama Aba laughed softly. "She passed earlier pretending she came for water." Brian smiled despite himself. Without even resting properly, he left the compound soon afterward, and everybody knew exactly where he was going. Sharon had spent nearly 2 hours changing clothes repeatedly. Nothing looked right. Too simple, too village, too childish. Finally, Doreen became tired of watching. "Sister, you are behaving like someone preparing for a wedding." Sharon threw a pillow at her. "You are useless." But truthfully, her heart was beating wildly. Then suddenly, Okan rushed into the compound dramatically. "He is coming." Immediately, Sharon stood up too fast and hit her knee on a stool. "Ah!" Okan collapsed laughing. "You have suffered." Sharon ignored him completely and rushed outside. Then she saw him, walking toward the compound beneath the afternoon sun. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The months apart, the fears, the misunderstandings, everything vanished. Brian stopped walking too. Neither spoke immediately, because suddenly both realized how deeply they had missed each other. Then Sharon smiled softly, and Brian's heart nearly stopped. Without thinking, he walked faster. When they finally reached each other, the hug came naturally, tight, real, long enough for Okan to start fake coughing loudly nearby. "Public behavior," he shouted dramatically. Both immediately separated, laughing awkwardly. Still, the happiness was real, painfully real. For the rest of the afternoon, they walked together through familiar village paths, talking non-stop. At first, things felt easy again, comfortable, like old times. Brian described Kampala stories dramatically. Taxi conductors, school chaos, students fighting over charges. One teacher spoke terrible Luganda. Sharon laughed until tears formed again. And escalators? She teased. Brian groaned immediately. Please, let us heal from that trauma. They laughed loudly together near River Unyama exactly like before. For a while, everything felt normal again. But then small differences slowly began appearing. Tiny things, easy to ignore at first. When Sharon mentioned village gossip, Brian seemed less interested. When she spoke about local problems, his attention drifted. Meanwhile, Brian talked constantly about opportunities, competitions, university dreams, and city life. At one point, he excitedly explained debate championships in Kampala. Sharon smiled politely, but deep inside, she suddenly felt left behind. The conversation no longer flowed exactly the same way. There were moments of silence now, moments where both seemed to realize they had been living in different worlds for too long. Still, they tried hard to reconnect. That evening, they sat beneath the tamarind tree again as sunset painted River Unyama gold. For a while, they simply enjoyed being together physically after so many months apart. Then Sharon spoke quietly. You really changed. Brian smiled slightly. So did you. How? You became more serious. Sharon laughed softly. Maybe because you stressed me. Brian gently held her hand. I missed this. So did I. Then silence returned again. A heavier silence this time. Finally, Sharon gathered courage carefully. Brian, That girl. Brian immediately knew who she meant. Vanessa? Sharon nodded quietly. What about her? You talk about her often. Brian sighed softly. She is just a friend. Only a friend. The question hung between them painfully. Brian looked away toward the river, and that hesitation again, that tiny, dangerous hesitation, hurt Sharon more than words. You see, she whispered, it is not like that. Then why can't you answer immediately? Brian rubbed his forehead tiredly. Because you always make it sound bad. I only want the truth. There is nothing happening. But something is changing. Brian became quiet, because deep down, he knew she was right. The following days became emotionally confusing. Sometimes they laughed together beautifully again. Other times, tension appeared unexpectedly. One afternoon, Brian joined old friends for football near the trading center. Village girls gathered watching as usual, and Sharon immediately noticed something different. Brian carried himself differently now. More confident, more mature. Girls noticed too. One girl whispered loudly, Kampala has made him handsome. Another giggled. Even his walking changed. Sharon felt jealousy burn instantly, especially because Brian himself seemed unaware of the attention. Later that evening, she confronted him jokingly. So now village girls admire you again. Brian laughed. You sound jealous. I am not jealous. You are. Sharon folded her arms dramatically. Maybe Kampala girls should keep you permanently. Brian stopped smiling immediately. The joke hit harder than expected. Don't say that. Why? Brian looked at her seriously. Because no matter what happens, Lukome is still home. And am I still home too? The question silenced him completely. For several seconds, only crickets spoke around them. Finally, Brian answered softly, yes. But somehow, the answer no longer sounded as certain as before. And Sharon noticed. That night, after walking her home, Brian sat alone outside his family hut, staring at the stars. For the first time in his life, his heart felt divided between two worlds. One world carried his roots, his childhood, Sharon, simple love. The other carried ambition, opportunity, a bigger future. And somehow Vanessa existed inside that future too. Back inside her room, Sharon lay awake listening to distant night sounds across Lukome. And deep down, a painful truth had started becoming impossible to ignore. The boy she loved was still Brian Okello, but Kampala was slowly turning him into someone new. The holidays ended too quickly. Before anyone in Lukome was emotionally ready, Brian had to return to Kampala for advanced level. This goodbye felt different from the first one. The first time he left, everything had been filled with excitement and hope. Their love still felt innocent and untouchable then. Now things were more complicated. Both Brian and Sharon smiled during his departure, but hidden beneath those smiles were fears neither fully expressed aloud. At the roadside, Sharon hugged him tightly before the bus arrived. "Do not disappear this time." Brian forced a smile. "I won't. You promise?" "I promise." But promises had started becoming fragile things between them. When the bus finally pulled away toward Kampala again, Sharon watched silently until it disappeared into dust. This time, she did not cry openly. That scared her more than tears. Advanced level education in Kampala transformed Brian completely. The pressure became intense immediately. This was no longer ordinary secondary school life. Every teacher constantly reminded students that A-level determined university, careers, and futures. Small mistakes destroy big dreams. Teachers repeated endlessly. Brian chose history, literature, economics, and divinity. The workload nearly killed him at first. Books piled endlessly across his desk. Students revised until midnight almost every day. Debate competitions increased. Research assignments became serious. Some students broke under pressure. Others became obsessed with success. And slowly, Brian became one of the best students in his class. Teachers admired his discipline and confidence during discussions. The debate club elevated his reputation further because he spoke passionately and intelligently, especially about northern Uganda, poverty, leadership, and education. For the first time in his life, Brian started imagining himself becoming something truly big. Maybe a lawyer, maybe a politician, maybe even a national leader someday. Those dreams excited him deeply, but success also pulled him further into Kampala life. Vanessa remained close throughout those years. Too close. At first, it stayed harmless. Study discussions, debate preparation, library sessions, school events, but emotional closeness grows quietly before people notice danger. Vanessa understood Brian's ambitions in ways few others did. Whenever he spoke about changing his family's future, she listened seriously. Whenever he doubted himself, she encouraged him. And unlike village life where survival itself consumed most conversations, Kampala allowed dreams to grow bigger. One evening after debate practice, Vanessa and Brian sat outside the school library watching rain fall over the city. "You think differently from most people," Vanessa said softly. Brian smiled tiredly. "You keep saying that because it's true." She looked toward the rain thoughtfully. "Most students here only dream for themselves. You dream for entire families." Brian became quiet. Then he admitted something honestly. When you grow up poor, success stops being personal. Vanessa looked at him carefully. "And that pressure scares you." Brian laughed softly. A little. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Vanessa said quietly, "You know, you don't always have to carry everything alone." Those words touched Brian more deeply than she realized, because beneath his confidence, loneliness still existed. Kampala had opened his mind, but it had also isolated him emotionally. And increasingly, Vanessa became the person who understood the version of him growing inside the city. Back in Gulu, Sharon also continued advanced level education at a nearby school, but her experience felt completely different. Unlike Brian's exciting city life, Sharon's days remained tied to village realities. Long walks, household responsibilities, limited school resources, family struggles, and most painfully, distance. At first, she and Brian still called regularly, but A-level pressure made communication harder. Some conversations became short and tired. Sometimes Brian sounded distracted. Other times Sharon herself felt emotionally exhausted. One evening during a phone call, Sharon asked softly, "What did you do today?" Brian stretched tiredly on his dormitory bed. Debate training, economics discussion, then library. You sound busy all the time now. I am busy. Silence followed. Then Sharon asked carefully, "And Vanessa?" Brian sighed immediately. "Again? You spend lots of time with her. She is part of the debate club." Sharon's voice lowered. "Do you love her?" The question hit him hard. Immediately, he answered, "No," and he meant it, at least partly, because what he felt for Vanessa confused him deeply. It wasn't the same as his love for Sharon. Sharon was home, roots, history, first love. But Vanessa represented the person Brian was becoming. And sometimes those two worlds collided painfully inside him. The real crack came during the second term. A classmate posted pictures from a debate event on social media. In one picture, Vanessa leaned comfortably against Brian while both laughed naturally. The photo spread quickly. Eventually, someone from Kampala showed it to a cousin in Gulu. By evening, half of Lukome had already seen it. And unfortunately, so had Sharon. That night, her hands shook while holding the phone. "Who is she to you, really?" Brian immediately became defensive. "I told you already. She's touching you like a girlfriend. It was only a picture. You looked happy." The accusation frustrated him instantly. "So now I cannot laugh?" "That is not what I mean." "Then what do you mean?" Sharon's voice cracked emotionally. "I mean I miss you while another girl spends every day beside you." Silence. Heavy silence. Brian closed his eyes tiredly. For the first time, anger entered his voice too. "You think this life is easy for me?" "I didn't say that. You think I enjoy constantly struggling to survive here?" "I only want honesty. And I want trust." Both stopped speaking, breathing heavily through a weak phone network. Finally, Sharon whispered painfully, "I feel like I am losing you." The sentence pierced straight through Brian's chest, because deep inside part of him feared the same thing. Months passed. A-level years continued shaping them differently. Brian became more polished, ambitious, and intellectually sharp. He learned public speaking, leadership, networking, and confidence. Even his accent changed gradually. Meanwhile, Sharon matured differently. Village responsibility strengthened her emotionally. She became calmer, wiser, and more grounded. But increasingly, their conversations struggled. Sometimes they still laughed beautifully together. Other times they sounded like strangers trying to remember old versions of themselves. One holiday, Brian returned home again. This time the differences felt impossible to ignore completely. He now used English naturally, even in casual speech. He discussed politics, universities, internships, and opportunities constantly. Meanwhile, Sharon still loved simpler conversations about people, family, emotions, and village life. One evening beneath the tamarind tree, she finally asked quietly, "Are we still growing together or growing separately?" Brian looked stunned. What kind of question is that? A real one. He stared at the river silently, then finally admitted, "I don't know." That answer broke something inside Sharon, not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. Eventually, final A-level examinations arrived. Those months became brutal. Students revised almost like machines. Some slept only 3 hours nightly. Pressure from families became unbearable. For Brian, expectations were enormous now. Teachers believed he could earn top university sponsorship. His family sacrificed everything supporting him. Failure was impossible emotionally. Meanwhile, Sharon also fought hard academically despite fewer resources. And somehow, despite all the emotional confusion between them, both still quietly inspired each other. One night before exams, Brian called unexpectedly. "Are you awake?" "Yes." "You revised history?" "I am trying." Brian smiled softly through the phone. "You always panic before exams, and you always pretend to be confident." They both laughed gently. For a brief moment, everything sounded like old times again. Then Brian said quietly, "No matter what happens between us, I am proud of you." Sharon became silent, because somehow those words sounded like goodbye. Months later, results finally arrived, and once again both passed brilliantly. Brian's results shocked even teachers. Outstanding grades, enough for university sponsorship opportunities. The village celebrated wildly again. Otima slaughtered a goat for visitors. Mama Abe cried openly from pride. Even Bosco Lamaro praised Brian publicly during church service. Meanwhile, Sharon also performed excellently, earning admission opportunities for teacher training and university programs. For a brief moment, happiness returned fully. But beneath the celebrations, another reality waited quietly. University life was coming next, and universities would test their love harder than anything before. When the university admission letters finally arrived, Lukome Village celebrated like a place touched by miracles. Very few children from the village had ever reached university level before. Now both Brian Okello and Sharon Lamaro have done it. Old men at the trading center spoke proudly about them as if they were national leaders already. These children have lifted the name of Lukome. Education is truly powerful. Imagine a university. Even younger children started pointing at Brian and Sharon differently whenever they passed. To many villagers, the two had become symbols of hope. But behind the pride and celebration, life was preparing its most dangerous chapter yet. Brian received admission to study law at Makerere University. The moment the news reached Lukome, people reacted as if someone had entered parliament already. Law? A lawyer is coming from our village. Otima walked proudly for weeks afterward. Even Mama Abba started speaking carefully, sometimes jokingly saying, "I must behave well now before my son becomes government." Brian himself could hardly believe it. The boy who once feared escalators was now entering one of Uganda's biggest universities. But university life shocked him even more than Kampala had. Makerere felt like an entire world on its own. Thousands of students everywhere. Different tribes, countries, politics, parties, activism, relationships, pressure, freedom, temptations. For the first time in his life, nobody monitored him closely anymore. No village eyes, no parents nearby, no evening curfews. At first, the freedom felt beautiful, then slowly dangerous. Meanwhile, Sharon joined Gulu University to study education and literature. Unlike Brian's chaotic city environment, Sharon's university life remained closer to northern Uganda culture and home values. Still, university changed her too. She moved into hostel life for the first time, met students from different districts, experienced independence, learned confidence in public speaking and leadership. And surprisingly, many people admired her naturally. Sharon had matured beautifully over the years. Her intelligence, confidence, and warm personality attracted attention everywhere. Several boys tried approaching her immediately. One student from Lira wrote her poems constantly. Another bought her soda daily hoping for attention. But Sharon remained emotionally attached to Brian despite their struggles, at least in the beginning. University schedules destroyed the rhythm of their relationship completely. At A-level, they still had structure. Now life has become unpredictable. Lectures changed daily. Group discussions lasted late. Coursework multiplied endlessly. Sometimes Brian stayed awake all night, reading law cases and constitutional notes. Law school humbled him brutally. Professors embarrassed students publicly during lectures. One lecturer famously said, "If you fear pressure, leave law immediately." Brian nearly collapsed during the first semester. Huge books, complicated legal language, research, moot court presentations, competition from brilliant students. At times, he genuinely questioned whether he belonged there. But slowly, his confidence grew. And as it grew, so did his ambition. Meanwhile, Sharon's university life focused more on literature, teaching practice, research, and educational psychology. Her workload was heavy too, but emotionally, she remained more grounded than Brian. Still, the relationship suffered. Calls became irregular, visits reduced, misunderstandings increased. Sometimes weeks passed without proper conversations, and slowly, they stopped sharing their daily lives deeply like before. Unfortunately for Sharon, Vanessa also joined Makerere, this time studying political science. The moment Brian saw her again on campus during orientation week, something complicated awakened inside him immediately. Vanessa smiled widely after spotting him near the main hall. "Well, look who survived advanced level." Brian laughed warmly. "You too?" She hugged him naturally, and somehow the hug lasted slightly too long. Over the following months, Vanessa and Brian grew even closer than before. University life made it easy. Study discussions became cafe conversations. The debate club turned into political activism groups. Late-night campus walks became normal. And unlike Sharon, Vanessa physically existed inside Brian's daily reality now. She understood his university stress instantly because she lived it too. One rainy evening, after a student leadership debate, Brian and Vanessa sat under shelter waiting for rain to reduce. Campus lights reflected beautifully across wet pavements. Vanessa looked at him thoughtfully. "You know something?" "What?" "You are changing fast." Brian smiled slightly. "Good change or bad?" "Powerful change." He laughed softly. "You speak like a politician already." "I am serious." She leaned closer slightly. "You are becoming the kind of man people follow." Those words fed something dangerous inside Brian, because university awakened leadership dreams he had never fully admitted before. Student politics, public speaking, influence, recognition, and Vanessa encouraged all of it. Meanwhile, Sharon increasingly sensed herself drifting emotionally further from Brian. It showed in small, painful ways. Calls felt forced sometimes. Brian sounded distracted often, and whenever she visited Kampala occasionally, she felt like an outsider inside his new world. One holiday weekend, Sharon traveled to visit Brian unexpectedly. At first, he seemed happy, but throughout the visit, she noticed uncomfortable things. Brian now moved confidently around city life in ways she no longer understood. He knew restaurants, university politics, social circles, and important students. At one cafe near campus, Sharon watched silently as Brian and Vanessa joked naturally about university matters she barely understood. The two flowed together easily, too easily. And for the first time, Sharon truly felt threatened. Later that night, she finally confronted him. "Do you love her?" Brian looked exhausted immediately. "Not this again. Look at me honestly. She's my friend. You shine differently around her." The sentence silenced him painfully, because deep down, he knew there was truth inside it. Sharon's eyes filled slowly with tears. "I have been fighting for us alone for too long." Brian softened immediately. "That is not true. Then why do I constantly feel like I am losing you?" He had no answer, and silence itself became answer enough. Years passed quickly. Brian excelled academically and socially. By third year, he had become well known around campus for debates, student leadership, and legal activism. People respected him, girls admired him, lecturers noticed him. For the first time, Brian truly experienced power and recognition, and unfortunately, attention changes people. Not always intentionally, but slowly, quietly, dangerously. Meanwhile, Sharon focused deeply on education studies and teaching practice. She spent time in schools teaching literature and English to secondary students during internships. Children loved her naturally. Lecturers praised her patience and communication skills. She was becoming the kind of teacher who genuinely changes lives. Yet emotionally, loneliness followed her constantly. Sometimes she missed the old Brian so painfully that she cried alone after calls ended, because whenever she spoke to him now, she heard two versions of him. The village boy she loved, and the ambitious city man emerges stronger every year. The real breaking point came during Brian's 4th year. One evening after student election celebrations, Brian drank alcohol heavily for the first time in months. Vanessa stayed beside him the entire night. The atmosphere became emotional, exciting, dangerously intimate. At some point during the celebrations, Vanessa pulled Brian aside near campus gardens. "You know I believe in you more than anybody here." Brian smiled weakly. "You are drunk? So are you." Rain started falling lightly. Neither moved. Then Vanessa said quietly, "If the timing was different, maybe we would have happened." Brian's heartbeat changed instantly, because part of him had secretly wondered the same thing for years. And before wisdom returned, he kissed her. The moment lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. Immediately afterward, Brian stepped back, breathing heavily. Reality crashed into him painfully. Sharon, Lukome, promises, history. Vanessa herself looked shaken. Neither spoke properly afterward, but deep inside, Brian already knew a line had been crossed, and nothing would ever feel innocent again. After the night Brian kissed Vanessa, guilt entered his life like a shadow. At first, he tried convincing himself it meant nothing. It was only one mistake, one emotional moment, one drunken night. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The problem was not only the kiss. The real problem was that part of him had wanted it, and that realization terrified him. For several weeks after the incident, things between Brian and Vanessa became painfully awkward. They still met during lectures and student activities, but something had changed permanently. Sometimes their eyes met accidentally, and both immediately looked away. Other times, silence stretched heavily between them. One afternoon after a leadership seminar, Vanessa finally stopped him outside campus. "We cannot behave strangely forever." Brian rubbed his forehead tiredly. "I know. Do you regret it?" The question came softly. Brian became quiet, because the honest answer was complicated. He regretted hurting Sharon. He regretted crossing boundaries, but he could not honestly say he regretted feeling close to Vanessa. And Vanessa noticed his silence immediately. A sad smile crossed her face. "That tells me enough." Then she walked away slowly. Brian remained standing there for a long time, feeling emptier than ever. Back in Gulu, Sharon sensed something was wrong almost immediately. Love changes when guilt enters it. Even through phone calls, she could hear the difference. Brian sounded distracted, careful, and almost nervous sometimes. One evening during a call, Sharon suddenly asked, "Did something happen?" Brian froze slightly. "What do you mean? You sound far away." "I'm just tired." "No, this is different." Brian forced a laugh. "You overthink too much." But Sharon remained quiet. And for the first time in years, she started wondering whether their relationship was surviving only because of history, not because of the present anymore. That thought broke her heart slowly. As final university year approached, pressure intensified for everybody. Students suddenly became obsessed with the future. Internships, jobs, connections, recommendations, marriage plans, life after campus. Every conversation now carried urgency. At Makerere, Brian buried himself in law books and internships to escape emotional confusion. He joined a legal aid program helping poor communities with legal advice. Ironically, the experience reminded him painfully of Lukome and his childhood dreams. One afternoon, after helping an elderly woman with a land dispute, his supervisor praised him openly. "You argue with passion." Brian smiled softly. "I understand people like her. You should enter public leadership one day." Those words awakened ambition inside him again strongly. The more Brian succeeded academically, the more people around him treated him differently. Lecturers respected him. Politicians visiting campus noticed him. Student leaders invited him into important circles. Even newspapers occasionally quoted student activists like him during university debates. And slowly, Brian started seeing himself as someone destined for bigger things. Meanwhile, Sharon's final year carried different struggles. Teaching practice placements exhausted her physically and emotionally. Some schools lacked proper materials. Some students came from deeply broken homes. Yet Sharon loved teaching genuinely. Children trusted her easily. She had patience, warmth, the ability to make students feel seen. Her lecturers admired that deeply. One lecturer once told her, "You teach from the heart, not just the head." That compliment stayed with Sharon proudly. But outside academics, loneliness still followed her quietly. Most evenings after classes, she watched other couples walking around campus together, while she remained emotionally stuck inside a relationship that increasingly felt distant. Sometimes Brian tried. He really did. He called more during certain weeks, sent money occasionally when she struggled, visited during holidays. But something essential between them had weakened, and both knew it. Everything finally exploded during Sharon's final visit to Kampala before graduation. She arrived excited, hoping they could reconnect properly after months apart. At first, things went well. Brian took her around campus proudly, introduced her to classmates, showed her the law faculty. But then she met Vanessa properly for the first time, not just through stories, not through pictures, face to face, and immediately Sharon understood everything. Vanessa was intelligent, elegant, confident, and deeply comfortable around Brian. Too comfortable. The way they laughed, the way they understood each other quickly, the way silence between them felt natural. Sharon noticed all of it. That night inside Brian's hostel room, tension finally exploded. "You love her." Brian sighed heavily. "Sharon, no. Stop denying. She's only my friend. Friends do not look at each other like that." Brian stood up frustrated. "You are making problems from nothing." "Nothing?" Sharon's voice cracked emotionally. "I traveled all this way hoping to feel close to you again, but I feel like a stranger in your life." Brian became silent, because the painful part was, he understood exactly what she meant. Tears filled Sharon's eyes. "I have fought for us for years, Brian. I know that." "No, you don't know." Her voice shook harder now. "You left Lukome physically first, then slowly emotionally too." The words hit him brutally because they were true. For several seconds only silence filled the room. Then Sharon whispered the question she had feared asking for months. "Have you ever touched her?" Brian froze completely. That silence alone answered everything. Sharon stepped backward slowly as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Oh my God." Immediately Brian moved towards her. "Sharon, please listen." "When?" "It was a mistake." "When?" "Answer me." His voice lowered painfully. "Months ago." "What?" Sharon covered her mouth as if physically struck. For years she had feared losing him. Now the fear stood alive in front of her. Real, breathing, destroying everything. "You kissed her." Brian closed his eyes. "I am sorry. I was drunk." "Drunk?" Those three words shattered her completely. Sharon cried harder than she ever had before in her life. Not loudly, not dramatically, just deep, painful crying that comes when the heart finally breaks after holding pain too long. Brian tried touching her shoulder. She moved away immediately. "Do not touch me." The sentence nearly killed him. The next morning felt cold and empty. Sharon packed quietly. Brian barely slept all night. The atmosphere between them carried years of love collapsing painfully in slow motion. Before leaving, Sharon stood near the hostel door, holding her bag silently. Brian looked broken. "I love you." Sharon's eyes filled again instantly. "That is what hurts most." Then she spoke softly. "You were my home." Brian's chest tightened painfully. "And I would have followed you anywhere." He stepped closer, desperately. "We can fix this." But Sharon slowly shook her head. "No, because the problem is not only Vanessa." Brian looked confused. "You already left us emotionally long ago." The honesty in her voice crushed him completely. Then quietly, Sharon told him, "I just refused to accept it." For several seconds neither moved. Years of childhood memories, dreams, promises, first kisses, village roads, late-night calls, laughter beneath the tamarind tree, all stood between them like ghosts. Finally, Sharon wiped her tears slowly. "I hope you become everything you dreamed of." Then she walked away, and this time Brian did not follow her, because deep down he knew she was right. Graduation season eventually arrived. Families traveled proudly from villages and towns across Uganda. Students wore gowns, pictures filled campuses, music played everywhere. Yet beneath the celebrations, both Brian and Sharon carried private heartbreak. Otima and Mama Abba attended Brian's graduation proudly. Seeing their son graduate with a law degree felt almost unreal. Mama Abba cried openly during photographs. Otima stood straighter than ever before. "Our son is now a lawyer." Meanwhile, in Gulu, Sharon graduated beautifully too. Bosco Lamaro praised her proudly before relatives. "A teacher has risen from this family." People were celebrating both of them separately now. And that separation itself felt symbolic. The village children who once walked barefoot together to Lukome Primary School had reached university success side by side, but not together anymore. Soon after graduation, life pulled them further apart. Brian remained in Kampala, pursuing legal internships and political connections. His world became increasingly ambitious and complicated. Meanwhile, Sharon accepted teaching opportunities closer to northern Uganda. She wanted peace, purpose, something stable after years of emotional confusion. And slowly their communication faded almost completely. No more late-night calls, no more promises, no more "I love you," only painful silence. Yet despite everything, neither truly forgot the other. Because some loves do not disappear completely. They simply change shape inside the heart. And somewhere deep within Brian Okello, the memory of a village girl named Sharon Lamaro still lived quietly beneath all the ambition, success, and city lights. After university ended, reality arrived without mercy. Not the beautiful reality students imagine during graduation photos. Not the glamorous life people post about proudly. The real one: bills, pressure, loneliness, responsibility, and the frightening discovery that education alone did not automatically solve life. For the first time since childhood, Brian Okello and Sharon Lamaro now walked through life completely separately. No school connected them, no exams, no holidays forcing reunions, nothing, just adulthood. And adulthood was far harder than either of them expected. At first, Brian believed success would come quickly. After all, he had graduated with a law degree from Makerere. He had leadership experience, connections, confidence, and strong public speaking skills. But Kampala humbled him immediately. Finding employment became brutal. Law firms demanded experience from fresh graduates who had never worked before. Internships paid almost nothing. Some offices treated graduates like office runners rather than future lawyers. Every morning, Kampala was flooded with educated young people carrying folders and CVs desperately searching for opportunities. Brian became one of them. He woke early daily wearing the same 2 official shirts repeatedly, moving from office to office beneath Kampala heat. Sometimes he boarded taxis without enough transport money for return journeys. Sometimes he skipped lunch entirely. And worst of all, rejections became normal. "Leave your documents. We shall call you. We currently have no openings." Weeks became months. Savings disappeared quickly. Eventually, Brian moved into a tiny single rented room in the Makerere Kikoni area. The room was painfully small. 1 bed, one plastic chair, one saucepan, a leaking roof during rain. Yet every month rent still stressed him badly. The first night he cooked beans alone inside that room, reality finally hit him fully. University life is over. Nobody clapped for potential anymore. Now, survival mattered. One afternoon, while returning from another failed interview, heavy rain trapped Brian beneath a small shop veranda, alongside boda riders and street vendors. As he stood there frustrated, he overheard two men talking nearby. These graduates suffer. 1 degree, 0 money. The men laughed casually. The words hurt him deeply because they carried the truth. Back in Lukome, villagers still believed Kampala had transformed him into a successful man already. Whenever he called home, Junior excitedly asked, "So, brother, when are you buying a car?" Brian always laughed it off, but secretly, he himself was struggling to survive. Sometimes loneliness nearly consumed him, especially at night. Kampala nights after campus felt different. During university, there were always friends, discussions, events, movement. Now many classmates disappeared into jobs, relationships, or family businesses. Everybody suddenly became busy building life, and Brian increasingly found himself alone. Some nights he sat outside his small room listening to distant city noise while thinking about Lukome, thinking about simpler days, thinking about Sharon, because despite everything that happened, he missed her deeply, more deeply than pride allowed him to admit. Meanwhile, Sharon's life followed a very different path. After graduation, she accepted a teaching position at a secondary school near Gulu town. The salary was small, very small, but she loved teaching genuinely. Every morning, students greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Madam Sharon," and somehow, standing inside classrooms gave her peace. She taught literature with passion, often turning stories into emotional experiences that made students laugh, cry, and think deeply. Students adored her naturally. Even stubborn students behaved better in her lessons. One girl once told her, "Madam, when you teach, it feels real." That compliment healed something inside Sharon quietly, because after heartbreak and years of emotional confusion, teaching gave her purpose again. Still, life was not easy. Teachers struggled financially constantly. Transport costs, rent, family expectations, endless responsibilities. Sometimes Sharon reached the month end completely broke despite working tirelessly. And unlike campus life, adulthood became painfully repetitive. Wake up, teach, mark papers, cook, sleep. Some evenings she returned to a small rented room emotionally exhausted. And during those quiet nights, memories returned strongly, especially memories of Brian. As years passed, another pressure emerged: marriage. In African communities, once educated children finish university, society immediately begins asking questions. When are you marrying? Who are you seeing? Do not wait too long. For Sharon, the pressure became exhausting. At family gatherings, aunties constantly investigated her love life. Some even brought potential suitors. One man named Patrick, a businessman from Gulu, showed serious interest in her. He was respectful, financially stable, mature, and clearly ready for marriage. Mama Akello liked him immediately. He seems responsible. But Sharon struggled emotionally, not because Patrick was bad, but because part of her heart still belonged to unfinished history. One evening, Patrick invited her for dinner. The conversation went well until he asked gently, "You have loved someone deeply before, haven't you?" Sharon looked surprised. "How did you know?" Patrick smiled sadly. People who have never been hurt love differently. The honesty in his voice shook her slightly. For the first time, Sharon realized other people could actually see the emotional scars she carried quietly. After university, Vanessa entered Uganda's political and NGO world quickly through family connections. She adapted fast. Professional life suited her naturally. Confident, connected, ambitious. She and Brian still communicated occasionally after graduation. Sometimes they met for coffee, other times for networking events. And though the emotional tension between them remained unfinished, things never fully became a relationship. Partly because Brian himself remained emotionally conflicted, and partly because Vanessa understood something painful. Brian still carried Sharon inside him emotionally. One evening, while sitting together at a cafe in Kololo, Vanessa finally confronted him honestly. "I see you still love her." Brian stared quietly into his coffee. "Maybe." Vanessa smiled weakly. "Not just maybe." Then she added softly, "That village girl shaped you more than you realize." Brian looked away painfully, because deep down he knew she was right. 2 years after graduation, Brian finally returned to Lukome for an extended stay. This time, not as a student, not during holidays, but as a full adult. The village looked both familiar and different. The children had grown, new houses appeared, old people looked older. Even River Unyama seemed calmer somehow. When Brian arrived, villagers welcomed him proudly again. To them, he remained a symbol of success regardless of his private struggles. But walking through Lukome stirred painful emotions inside him. Every corner carried memories. The football field, the borehole, the tamarind tree, especially the tamarind tree. One evening he walked there alone near sunset, and fate, or perhaps life itself, brought Sharon there too. The moment they saw each other, both froze slightly. Years had passed, yet the emotional weight between them still felt immediate. Sharon looked more mature now, calmer, beautiful in a quieter way, and Brian suddenly realized how much life had happened without them together. Brian, Sharon. Awkward silence followed briefly. Then both laughed softly from nervousness. "You came back," Brian nodded, "just for a while." They sat beneath the tamarind tree carefully, almost like strangers trying to remember old versions of themselves. At first, the conversation stayed polite. Work, family, life updates. But slowly, old comfort returned slightly. They laughed about childhood memories, about escalators, about Okan stealing chickens, and for a brief moment, it almost felt like the past again. Then Sharon asked quietly, "Are you really happy?" The question hit Brian unexpectedly hard, because nobody had asked him that honestly in a long time. He looked towards the Unyama River silently. Finally, he answered, "I don't know." Sharon studied him carefully. "The village thinks you became everything you wanted." Brian laughed softly. "Villages see dreams differently." Then he admitted quietly, "Kampala can make someone successful outside while confusing them inside." Sharon understood immediately, because adulthood had humbled both of them differently. As darkness slowly covered Lukome that evening, both spoke more honestly than they had in years, about pressure, loneliness, expectations, failed dreams, emotional scars. Brian admitted how hard life after university truly became. "How strange," he said quietly. "We spent years believing campus was the hard part." Sharon smiled sadly. "Real life starts afterward." They both laughed softly, then silence settled comfortably between them again. Not romantic silence, not painful silence, just two people who once knew each other deeply, recognizing how much life had changed them. Finally, Sharon spoke softly. "You know, I hated you for a long time." Brian nodded slowly. "I deserved it. But now," she continued thoughtfully, "I think we were just young people trying to grow while holding on to each other too tightly." The maturity in her words humbled him deeply, because she was right. They had loved sincerely, but sometimes sincere love alone cannot survive different journeys. And yet, sitting there together beneath the same tamarind tree where everything began years ago, both quietly realized something beautiful too. No matter how life changed them, a part of their hearts would probably always belong to Lukome. To innocence, barefoot walks, first love, the children they once were before the world became complicated. After meeting again beneath the tamarind tree, Brian and Sharon did not suddenly fall back into love like village stories often promise. Real life was not that simple. Too much had happened. Too many years, too many wounds. But something important changed that evening. For the first time since their breakup, they truly saw each other not as enemies, not as lost lovers, but as two human beings who had survived life differently. And strangely, that understanding brought peace. After years of pain, separation, forgiveness, and growth, Sharon Lamaro and Bosco Okello slowly rebuilt the love they once believed was lost forever. This time, they were older, wiser, more careful with each other's hearts. Bosco had changed deeply after nearly losing Sharon forever. Kampala had humbled him. Life had humbled him even more. He no longer chased success carelessly while forgetting the people who loved him. And Sharon, too, had changed. The years of heartbreak taught her patience, strength, and caution. She no longer loved blindly like the village girl she once was beneath the tamarind tree. Their second chance grew slowly, not through dramatic promises, but through consistency. Bosco called often, visited frequently, spent more time in Gulu, helped Sharon emotionally and financially without pride. And eventually, the trust that had once broken between them slowly returned. After Bosco secured a stable international consultancy job with a legal and development organization in Kampala, he asked Sharon to finally move to the city permanently. One evening near River Unyama, beneath the same tamarind tree that had witnessed their entire journey, Bosco held Sharon's hand quietly. No more distance this time. Sharon smiled softly. "You promise?" Bosco nodded. "This time I build with you beside me." Months later, Sharon left Gulu and joined Bosco in Kampala. The city that once stole him from her now became the place where they tried rebuilding life together. At first, everything felt beautiful. They rented a decent home in Ntinda. Sharon found work at a private secondary school while Bosco's career continued growing fast. Unlike their younger years, they now appreciated small, peaceful things deeply. Cooking together, church on Sundays, evening walks, laughing over old village stories. Sometimes Sharon would joke, "Imagine the same Brian who feared escalators now drives in Kampala traffic." Bosco laughed every single time. "You will never let me heal from that story." Soon both families agreed it was finally time to make everything official properly. The traditional introduction ceremony became one of the biggest celebrations Lukome had seen in years. Women danced proudly. Drums echoed through the village all night. Goats were slaughtered. Relatives filled the compound with laughter and songs. Bosco arrived with elders, gifts, cows, sugar, and envelopes exactly according to Acholi tradition. Old men who once predicted their marriage during childhood now celebrated loudly like prophets finally proven right. Bosco's father, Mzee Otima, appeared especially proud that day. He welcomed guests warmly, spoke respectfully, and blessed the union emotionally. During speeches, he even said, "These children have taught us that true love survives storms." Everybody applauded. Sharon herself felt emotional hearing those words, because after everything they survived, she truly believed peace had finally arrived. Months later, they held a beautiful white wedding in Kampala. Sharon looked radiant in her gown. Bosco nearly cried watching her walk down the aisle, and for the first time in many years, both genuinely felt happy, complete, safe. Marriage softened them further. Within the first years, Sharon gave birth to two beautiful children. A boy first called Derek Okello, then a girl called Rachel Okello. Bosco transformed completely into a loving father. Even Sharon sometimes laughed seeing how the once stubborn village boy now carried babies around proudly while singing nonsense lullabies. Family life healed many old wounds. Weekends became filled with cartoons, church, family visits, and children running around the compound laughing. And because Bosco's work required international travel sometimes, he decided to bring his parents from Lukome to stay temporarily in Kampala and help Sharon with the children whenever he traveled. At first, it seemed like perfect family unity. Mama Abba loved caring for the grandchildren. Mizi Otima enjoyed city life surprisingly more than expected, always complimenting Sharon about looking more beautiful than she was in Lukome. He often sat outside chatting proudly with neighbors about his son's success. To Sharon, it felt comforting having family around again. She trusted them completely, and that trust would later destroy everything. One year, Bosco received a major work opportunity in the United States for nearly 12 months. The offer could completely elevate his career. Though Sharon worried about the distance, Bosco reassured her constantly, "This is for our future." Before leaving, he hugged his father tightly. "Take care of them for me." Mizi Otima nodded proudly. "You are my son. Go work peacefully." Bosco kissed Sharon and the children goodbye at Entebbe Airport, believing his family was safe. He had no idea darkness was quietly entering his home already. This changed after the father experienced all the good life, and he vowed not to go back to the village. Mama Abba was more focused taking care of his grandkids than any person in the house. At first, life continued normally after Bosco left. Sharon focused on the children and teaching. Mama Abba remained kind and supportive. But slowly, Mizi Otima's behavior toward Sharon began changing in disturbing ways. Long, uncomfortable stares, private comments, unnecessary closeness. At first, Sharon dismissed it as a misunderstanding. After all, this was her father-in-law, the man who helped raise Bosco, the respected elder of the family. But eventually, his behavior became impossible to ignore. One evening while Mama Abba visited church fellowship, Mizi Otima cornered Sharon in the sitting room and confessed feelings she never imagined hearing. Sharon felt sick immediately. "You are my father in law," she said angrily. But the old man's obsession had already grown dangerously. Over time, manipulation, threats, emotional pressure, and fear entered the home quietly. Sharon became trapped inside silence, terrified of destroying her marriage, terrified nobody would believe her, terrified of shame, and most painfully, terrified of hurting Bosco. Months passed under emotional torment. Mama Abba noticed nothing. The children understood nothing. And far away in America, Bosco proudly sent money home, believing his family remained united. Then disaster struck. 1 month before Bosco's return to Uganda, Sharon discovered she was pregnant again. The news nearly destroyed her mentally. She knew immediately the child could not be Bosco's. Fear consumed her completely. Meanwhile, Mizi Otima became colder and more threatening. "If you speak," he warned her quietly one night, "your life will be destroyed first." Sharon lived in panic daily. By the time Bosco finally returned from America, excited to reunite with his family, Sharon was emotionally exhausted. 2 months later, she finally announced the pregnancy carefully. Bosco became overjoyed. A third child. He hugged her happily while Sharon forced a smile through unbearable guilt and fear. That moment haunted her deeply afterward, because for the first time in her life she hated herself. Hoping for emotional support, Sharon later brought her younger sister Doreen Lamaro to Kampala to continue her studies from Kiambogo University. She believed family presence would help stabilize her emotionally, but tragedy repeated itself. Mizi Otima eventually began manipulating Doreen too. Unlike Sharon, Doreen resisted openly. When she threatened to expose him, The old man turned aggressive and threatening. "You village girls think anyone will believe you against me," he warned. Doreen finally confessed everything to Sharon in tears. And in that moment, Sharon realized the horrible truth. This had never been love, never temptation, never weakness. It was abuse hidden behind family respect and silence. The secret finally exploded after Doreen reported the abuse to a university counselor who involved authorities. Investigations followed quickly: medical evidence, messages, witness accounts, family confrontations. The scandal shocked both Kampala and Lukome terribly. Bosco refused to believe it at first. He defended his father angrily. Until more truths emerged, his world collapsed. The pregnancy timeline, Sharon's emotional breakdowns, Doreen's testimony, everything connected painfully. One evening, Bosco sat alone outside their house, completely broken. The same man who once dreamed of building a perfect family now faced unbearable humiliation publicly. When Sharon tried explaining through tears, Bosco simply asked one painful question. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Sharon cried uncontrollably. "Because I was afraid." And honestly, that answer hurt him most, because he realized his wife had suffered silently beside his own family while he remained blind. Eventually, Mazio Tima was arrested and charged. The case shocked the entire community deeply. Mama Abba herself nearly collapsed from shame and disbelief. The respected village elder people, once admired, now stood exposed publicly as a manipulative predator. Bosco changed completely afterward. The betrayal destroyed him emotionally, not only from Sharon, but from his own father. Though he eventually understood Sharon had been trapped emotionally and psychologically, the damage inside the marriage became too deep. Pain, shame, anger, public humiliation, silence. Finally, after months of emotional struggle, Bosco filed for divorce quietly. The process broke both of them, because despite everything, they still loved each other somewhere beneath the wreckage. But some wounds leave relationships unable to breathe again. After the divorce, Sharon relocated to Mukono, where Bosco had rented her a house with her children quietly. The village that once celebrated her love story now watched her with mixed emotions. Some judged her unfairly, others pitied her. But slowly, something unexpected happened. Sharon refused to let shame destroy her life completely. She once visited Lukome to visit her parents, continued teaching, raised her children fiercely, supported Doreen's education, and over time, many villagers began respecting her strength instead of gossiping. One evening years later, Sharon went back to Lukome, sat beneath the tamarind tree again, watching sunset over River Unyama while her children played nearby. Life had broken her many times, but it had not finished with her. And somehow, in the middle of all the pain, betrayal, marriage, loss, and public shame, she discovered something important. A person's worst chapter should never become the entire story of their life. Bosco kept in touch with Sharon even after all that had happened. And so the children of Lukome finally learned the hardest lesson of all. Not every betrayal comes from strangers. Sometimes danger hides inside trusted homes. Sometimes silence protects pain instead of peace. And sometimes survival itself becomes the bravest form of strength. But even after heartbreak, shame, and destruction, life still continues flowing forward quietly, just like River Unyama beside the old tamarind tree.